want you to get together. I want you to get together. Put your hands together one time. I want you to get together. 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 Put your hands together one time. I want you to get together. I want you to get together. I want you to get together.
My baby don't care for clothes. My baby just cares for me. My baby don't care for cars and races. My baby don't care for high tone places. Liz Taylor is not a style, and even Lana Turner's smile, something he can't see. cares for me. Baby, my baby don't care for shows, and he don't even care for clothes. He cares for me. My baby don't care for cars and races. Baby don't care for. He don't care for high-tone places. Liz Taylor is not his style, and even Liberace smile. Something he can't see is something he can't see. I wonder what's wrong with baby. My baby just cares for. My baby just cares for. My baby just cares for me.
My house in Budapest, my hidden treasure chest, golden grand piano, my beauty focused EOU. Ooh, you, ooh, I'd leave it all. My acres of land I've achieved. It may be hard for you to stop and believe, but for you, ooh, I'd leave it all. Ooh, for you, I'd leave it all. And give me one good reason why I should never make a change. Baby, if you owe me, then all of this will go away. My many artifacts, the list goes on. If you just say the words, I'll up and run. Oh, to you, I'd leave it all. Oh, to you, I'd leave it all. Give me one good reason why I should never make a change. Baby, if you owe me, then all of this will go away. Give me one good reason why I should never make a change. Baby, if you owe me, then all of this will go away. My friends and family, they don't understand. They fear they'll lose so much if you take my hand. But for you, I'd lose it all. Ooh, for you, I'd lose it all. Give me one good reason why I should never make a change. Baby, if you owe me, then all of this will go away. Give me one good reason why I should never make a change. Baby, if you owe me, then all of this will go away. My house in Budapest, my hidden treasure chest, golden grand piano, my beautiful Castillo. I'd leave it all. Oh, for you, I'd leave it all.
Well, hello, good morning, and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us today for this Property Symposium for Media Clash. We'll be exploring the rapidly rising importance of sustainability in commercial and residential, its impact on valuations and financing, the built environment, retrofitting, reimagining old buildings for new values, client appetite, and indeed the cost of that, and much, much more. Have a look at this. We're coming to you live today from Bureau Happold. It's a remarkable international integrated consultancy practice in Bath. 31 locations worldwide, 1,900 employees. We think it's an exemplar creative engineering company, and we're delighted to be here today. It's a perfect setting for us. So today, we'll be running keynotes, panel discussions, and networking sessions from now until 1 o'clock. Please do send in your questions and we'll try and get through as many as we can. We've got an absolutely stellar cast of contributors today, from regional operators to some of the world's biggest real estate companies. We hope you'll find it a stimulating and thought-provoking sense check of best practice currently and what might be emerging. You can see some of it rolling as I'm talking. So what sort of world do we wish to create and bequeath in terms of sustainability in property? What are our responsibilities and opportunities? How does legislation and changing customer concerns affect property, commercial and resi? And how might subsequent legislation affect it? How have consumer and client values been altered or even perhaps accelerated by the pandemic? And of course, what are some of the best practice examples to stimulate, prompt and inspire us? All of this and much more looms. We want to give thanks to our sponsors today. They are Action Net Zero, Future Ground, GA Energy and Interaction. To each, many thanks indeed, and we'll be hearing from each subsequently. Property Symposium is brought to you by Media Clash, the company behind the leading magazines and property awards in Bath, Bristol, Cardiff and Exeter. We'll be updating on the awards today and also talking about a special sustainability report which we're publishing across all those magazines in the region in the coming weeks. The lineup you've seen, and we'll start, there we go, we'll start very shortly with Lucian Cook with some bespoke research which we've commissioned from Savills. There are 2 sessions on financing, then on reworking and reimagining existing buildings, then a short networking break, and please do take advantage of that. Then when we come back, there's more specially commissioned research, this time from CBRE on the commercial sector, plus panels from visionaries and experts to wrap up the whole session, and then we'll have further networking. We'll dot in some mention of some of the companies attending. There are many dozens of companies attending today, and thank you for that. But it'll give you a flavour of the quality and perhaps also who to seek out at the networking. And some information about the region-leading property awards, as mentioned, in Bristol, Bath, Cardiff and Exeter. We really hope you enjoy the meeting. First up, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our first keynote. It's a blockbuster start with Lucian Cook from Savills. Lucian heads Savills' residential research team. He's widely recognised for his incisive, thoughtful analysis of UK property trends. He's one of the most quoted property commentators in the broadsheets. He frequently appears on radio and television, leads a team of 25 researchers who cover everything from social housing to the prime markets of central London, development land to residential investment. He also provides consultancy advice to landowners, developers, house builders and investors. And just on a personal note, having known him at Media Clash via our creative work, there he is, there's Lucian this morning, but having known him via our creative work on Savills research, I can absolutely attest personally to his wisdom and very thorough approach. Lucian, good morning. And the floor is yours, sir, to give us your wisdom and analysis, and we'll have a couple of questions at the end of it. Thank you. Over to you, Lucian.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Greg. I'm going to give you a spin through how the sustainability challenge affects residential property, the scale of the challenge, potentially some of the solutions and the policy levers which may be put in place. So let's kick off. I think the first thing to acknowledge is that residential property particularly, and property more generally, represents something of a significant challenge in terms of getting towards that key government target of net zero. I'm a man who loves charts and graphs. You can see from the chart on the left-hand side that if you look at CO2 emissions coming from energy supply and pretty much every other source of carbon, we've seen this significant reduction since the mid to late 2000s, almost on a year-by-year basis consistently. The difficulty, of course, is if you look at residential property, it is an outlier. And whilst you saw gains through to 2014, it is still responsible for 68.1 million tonnes of carbon emissions each year. That's 20% of the total. And whilst they fell by 19%, from 2007 to 2014. Since 2014, they've gone the wrong way. They've actually increased, they've gone up by a figure of 9% over the period since then. In terms of some of the challenges that we have, whilst we've made significant improvements in new stock being delivered to the market, we have a significant legacy issue for old stock, creating a huge requirement for a retrofit program across the country. So if you look at the least energy efficient homes, 30% of homes which were built pre-war have an E, F, or G EPC rating. And indeed, if you go back further, 47% of homes built pre-1900 suffer in the same way and present this significant challenge. In terms of the source of heat for those homes, of course, we remain pretty much wedded to the gas boiler. Some 86% of UK housing stock is using gas to heat their homes. So some massive challenges, and residential really important for the government to meet its aspirations to get to net zero. In terms then of how you deliver that, from a policy environment, essentially you need a three-pronged approach. In the first instance, you need to deal with energy use at point of source, how much energy we're physically bringing into our properties. Secondly, we need to deal with decarbonisation of our heating sources, so getting ourselves away from that reliance on the gas boiler. And thirdly, we need to look at improving our energy efficiency, and the government there looking significantly at a fabric first approach in the first instance to improve the energy efficiency of our homes, with decarbonisation of heating sources, something that perhaps follows that. So if you like, you can deal with the quick wins first. In terms of the scale of the challenge, the government has suggested that they would like to get to EPCC by 2035, wherever that is affordable and practical to do so. So let's just get an indication of the scale of the challenge. To do that, the BEIS estimate that if we're going to do that, we need to increase the investment in our homes in energy efficiency improvements by 700% from current rates, so 7 times the current level. That's a significant challenge, which in due course will require significant policy intervention that perhaps we'll look at a little bit later. And some analysis that we did, we took one of our analysts, we locked them in a dark room for 3 weeks. We made them analyse every single EPC certificate that's been granted across the UK. And we looked at the cost of all of the measures that have been suggested. We added that together, we applied it across the whole of the UK housing stock. And that tells us that if you were to implement all of the suggestions that are made from EPC improvements, then across the UK, the total level of spends to implement all of those would be this staggering figure of 330 billion. Against that context, it's really important to note that there is no single silver bullet. There is no single solution to this. The guys who we locked in this darkened room then looked specifically at each and every individual measure that was being suggested under these energy performance certificates, and that is shown within this particular slide. So you can see there of the most recommended improvements that we have for all housing stock. They range from very simple, low-cost interventions such as low energy lighting, average cost £38, and you can see there that consistently being one of the recommendations across all of our stock, through to some of the far more expensive items when it comes to the energy source for that property, whether it's photovoltaic panels or whether it's solar water heating, or indeed when you get to that older housing stock, that stuff that is perhaps pre-1900 or between 1900 and 1930, requirements for quite expensive and often quite intrusive measures such as solid wall insulation. So it gives you an idea that actually, and I think this is one of the problems that faces consumers, faced with this array of measures that you could undertake, how do you prioritize them? How do you do it? And for many people, there'll be a significant question: what's the payback on doing this? Does it make financial sense for me to improve in my energy efficiency improvements, or are we just reliant on people doing the right thing, given the reawakening of their social conscience around energy consumption and this desire, as we've said, to get to net zero? And in that respect, if we look at the financial returns that are available, we can take some data which is taken from the English Housing Survey of 2019-2020, and they looked at the costs and the returns of getting properties which are the least energy efficient, so D, E, and F and G, up to a C standard rating. So we can see here that that energy performance D-rated homes, 47% of our housing stock, the cost of getting them to EPC level C is £6,500 or thereabouts. If you go to the least energy efficient homes, those rated F and G, then the cost of getting them to C, on average, is closer to £19,000. They only account for 3% of the housing stock, but you are there talking about significant levels of expenditure, particularly at a time that we have this cost of living squeeze. You then look at the energy savings that result from that, and you look at the payback period that is on offer as things stood in that period 2019-2020, and you can see whilst you get it takes 14 years to recover your cost for F and G, hardly a payback that is going to excite a lot of people. If you're going to go from D to C to get those marginal gains, that's a 36-year payback period. And that in itself, those simple economics and the length of that payback period present a significant challenge in terms of encouraging householders to invest in these energy performance measures. So what then about the value of your home? If you invest in these measures, you end up with a more energy efficient home. Given that we're a nation that absolutely obsesses about the value of our home, is it going to improve the value of your home? Well, here, again, we did some work. We cross-referenced energy performance certificates against the square footage of a property, and we looked at average sale prices for those property over a period, and we sought to establish whether or not in the first instance there was a brown discount for the less energy efficient homes and whether or not there was a green premium for the most energy efficient homes. And what you can see from this chart is that at the margins, that is the case, that very much the least energy efficient homes are worth less on average than your average band D home, and your A and B value homes are worth around 10% more on a pounds per square foot basis. So there is some value in doing that. I think the difficulty that you have is that there is limited value uplift in the middle. So for a number of people, the payback period will be quite long, and there isn't necessarily the guarantee that it will result in an improvement in the value of your home. And again, that's a major inhibition in terms of effecting change. And it may well be that the government look at changing that to see whether or not that acts as an incentive. Of course, that is a snapshot at a point in time. And I think that one of the things that has happened over the period of the pandemic and through the lockdown has been a bit of a change in perception. I think a few things have happened. One, energy costs have risen, and they've risen quite significantly. In many circumstances, that will make people reconsider the economics of undertaking some of these energy efficiency improvements. And secondly, by spending much more time at home during that lockdown period, as we've said, our sort of social consciousness about the energy that we use has been brought to the forefront of our minds. So in that respect, recently, we went out to all of Savills clients, and we asked them whether or not they would pay more for an energy efficient home. Now, the results I'm about to show you are a little bit skewed because they're Savills clients, they're generally pretty affluent homeowners. And in that respect, they probably have the financial resources to be able to pay more for a property which is more energy efficient. But nonetheless, here's the results. About 4 in 10 still said actually that if more than 75% of a property's energy was powered by renewable sources, they'd just pay the same. So, still a major challenge. But really encouragingly, 29% said that they would now be prepared to pay more than 5%, and a further 34% said they'll pay somewhere up to 5% more for a home which is more energy efficient. So, in that respect, this idea of a green premium, we believe, is gathering momentum, and we think will gather momentum as we go forward. And one of the reasons that we think that will be the case is that 68% of respondents said EPC ratings had become more important to their decision making over the period of the last year. 19% said they were very important. 68% said they were important. 19% said they were very important. And a third, just over a third, said they had become more important over the period of the last year. So clearly, there is some change in perception that is sort of underpinning and may underpin change. So that's generally a bit about premiums, returns, scale of the challenge. What about the policy environment? So there's some carrots and incentives in people to do it. Where is the government going to go? What are going to be the sticks? What is it that's going to compel us to make change to improve the energy performance of our homes to get much closer to tying into the sustainability agenda? Well, here what I'm going to do is look at some of the measures that we have and some of the policy initiatives that are in place for different parts of the UK housing market. And in the first instance, I'm going to start with rented homes. So starting with the affordable housing sector, about 5 million homes in that sector. 9% of them are E, F and G, 54% are A, B and C, a very strong policy environment to make sure that those homes are zero carbon through 2050. That, if you like, the guarantee or the impetus for that to happen is that will come in through the Decent Home Standard. And already we know that affordable housing providers are making significant provision to get to zero carbon to 2050. It may impact upon some of their other aspirations, for example, around the delivery of new homes. It is a significant cost challenge. You can see there the cost there averaging about £20,600 per dwelling to do that. But through the Decent Home Standard, you can see that acting as a catalyst for them to address this particular issue. Of course, some of that housing stock is just not going to be economic to do. And we believe that from our survey work, about 17% of homes could be uneconomic. And the answer there for those housing associations is going to be a combination of redevelopment, selling that in energy efficient stock, or looking at carbon offsetting to address their carbon footprint. If we move then to the private rented sector, a few more homes there, about 5.6 million, generally less energy efficient. So you've gone from 9 to 18% of housing stock at those lower ratings of E, F or G. There is a consultation which has been long outstanding and we know will be introduced at some point to change the minimum energy efficiency rating for those homes to be able to let them from a current E towards C, and there will be far less wriggle room for private landlords to get away from that. So there was an exemption to that if the cost was going to exceed £3,500. You're going to push that figure towards £10,000. That means landlords are more likely to put their hand in their pocket. And that is going to come. It's going to come relatively quickly, and it's something that a number of private landlords need to be planning for right now. And they will be forensically looking at the energy performance of their housing stock. Equally, the lenders are onto this. So we're seeing the development of green finance specifically targeted at the buy-to-let community to effect this change. What will it do? Well, in an environment where buy-to-let landlords are under some pressure, particularly facing increased interest rates and much greater regulation generally, I think it will put some pressure on private landlords. It is likely to be another reason why some will exit the sector or rationalise their portfolios. But in terms of that overall supply of private rented accommodation, the institutions who have invested in the build-to-rent sector are generally much better placed to do with it. They have far more modern housing stock where the EPC and environmental credentials of that housing are significantly better, and they can look at all of those three policy areas or those three areas that we identified early on to effect change to make sure that they are meeting regulation. So it puts, if you like, that build-to-rent sector, it gives them a further competitive advantage over and above the private landlord. If we move on from there and we look at owner-occupied homes, so generally, again, so we're talking about roughly in the order of 19 million homes here. 38% of them are EP or A, B, or C energy efficiency rating. Quite a high proportion, around a fifth, are in the lowest energy ratings of E, F, and G. And in terms of their energy consumption, we know that their energy consumption is 21% higher than private renters, and it's 43% higher than affordable renters. So tackling this quite difficult to access owner-occupied market, encouraging owner-occupiers to invest in energy efficiency improvements is going to be absolutely critical to getting towards net zero or getting to net zero by 2050. Of course, those owners fall into two categories. The first are those who have a mortgage, about 9 million of them in total. We know from various consultation papers that are out that there are two main policy levers as things stand to encourage or compel those mortgaged owner occupiers to improve in the energy efficiency of their home. And the main one of those is going to be around addressing mortgage lending. And that essentially means that you have two bites at the cherry. You have two critical points in the home ownership cycle where you can target those homeowners. The first is at the point of purchase, and the second is at the point of remortgage. How's that going to be done? Well, we know that lenders are going to be set targets, not only to lend for energy efficiency improvement works, but also more generally to improve the EPC profile of their loan book. And that's absolutely critical, because if you have a lender who's looking at the EPC profile of their loan book, they're set a mandatory target to improve that, then the terms upon which the mortgage debt they offer may well depend upon the energy efficiency of the home. And that might mean that the availability of mortgage finance, the terms of that mortgage finance, and really critically, the cost of that mortgage finance will increasingly become dependent on the energy efficiency of your home. And that can change that financial equation around whether or not to invest in that property relatively quickly. So that's really important to watch exactly how that consultation plays out. But speaking to the lenders, we know that this is already significantly within our radar. And then we have the more difficult area to challenge, the people with no mortgage. You don't have, if you like, the same point at which you can influence behavior. And there's, over 10 million of them, and their numbers have gone up by over 1.5 million over the period of the last 10 years. They tend to be older households. They tend to be living in less energy efficiency homes, and they tend to have been in their home for a period of 24 years. So you don't have that trigger point to influence behavior. And how do you target them? Well, that's the big unanswered question. And I think that's the one that may mean actually that the government doesn't just stop where it's going and in terms of policy and just look at lending and just look at minimum requirements for letting. It's going to have to go further. So what are the policy options? Well, one thing that we know from the recent past, given the concerns over the cost of living crisis, is that just simply loading taxes onto energy, so having higher energy pricing, is highly politically sensitive. I think that's unlikely to occur. Grants and green finance, I think generally can only go so far, given the scale of the cost challenge that we have. You could find proposals such as that we've seen from the Green Building Council, that you have mandatory requirements for the EPC rating at the point of sale. That's perhaps a little bit too draconian for the government to go for right now. But equally, they're going to look at the possibility of phasing out the gas boiler, particularly ensuring that any new boilers are hydrogen ready. They're also looking at investment in air and ground source heat pumps and things like biomass fed district heating. So all of those things, I think we're going to see significant innovation around over the period of the next 5 to 10 years. If they were to go more extreme, they might look at changing the tax system so it is more aligned with sustainability objectives. That could be property surcharges and discounts and stamp duty and council tax, or even possibly a replacement of all of those with an annual property tax, which is linked to the environmental credentials of your home. The difficulty, of course, with that is that we've got a lot of people in heritage property and listed buildings. And where then is that balance between having a listed building with a high heritage value against the context that actually it's relatively energy efficient. And I think there we do need some significant and strong guidance as to how we address that. And the second question is, how does new build fit in? So let's look very quickly to finish at where that leaves us from a development perspective. Well, I think in the first instance, one of the things that we know is that the house builders are I would say stepping up to the challenge. So this is an image of Barratt Homes' Z House. It's been developed in conjunction as a project with the University of Salford. Rather interestingly, I think they've got 3 or 4 students living in that house and feeding back things about the livability, the ease of use of a whole myriad of facilities, amenities, and systems that are in place to improve the energy efficiency of our new homes. Now, in some cases, the cost of those are going to be significant, and they simply won't be achievable. But I think the key point here is what we learn from the innovation within that new build sector will relatively rapidly trickle down into our second-hand housing stock. And equally, I think quite importantly, when you get that energy efficiency right within new homes, it will be a key means of sustaining the new build premium that already exists, and that will sustain over a longer period through the lifetime of ownership of a new build property. So there is some great stuff being done by the house builders, which will have benefits more widely across the housing stock. In terms of where we build our homes and what we build, I think there are probably 2 policy interventions that create some tensions between sustainability objectives on the one hand and a desire to deliver more homes and meet housing need on the other. The first is a requirement for biodiversity net gain. So it is expected that from 2023, it will be mandatory where you undertake a development to result in a 10% biodiversity net gain at the end compared to the beginning. That is likely to be enforced through Section 106 planning applications or specific conservation covenants. It's to be agreed before the development commences. It's got to be delivered by the end of the development, and it's got to be maintained for 30 years. And of course, what that requires is everybody to develop new skills, but it is also going to come at something of a cost. It can be delivered on site, it can partly be delivered off site, and it can also be delivered by purchasing biodiversity credits. But there is a cost. We believe it's going to require about 5,400 hectares per annum across the UK to be dedicated towards biodiversity net gain, and the cost is likely to be in the region of £20,000 per hectare. And then secondly, the other one, very live at the moment, is this requirement for nitrate and nutrient neutrality. And you can see here a map on the right-hand side, which shows all of those catchments where this is now a requirement. They affect 74 local planning authorities across the UK. And if that's not addressed, we believe that 50 to 70% of homes planned within these areas could be at risk if there's a failure to address this issue. So there are still some very significant challenges, but what we know is that this is not an issue which is going to go away. And I hope that this presentation has given you some insight in terms of the scale of the challenge, the potential solutions, and how that may have an impact on the housing market. So that's me done. I'm going to hand you over. I'm going to hand you back to Greg, I think, possibly for a couple of questions.
Lucian, thank you for that. There's a welter of detail there. We'll be publishing some, perhaps all of that, as part of this longer form report, and thank you very much indeed. I want to come to some headline points. You mentioned sticks and carrots. Legislation does work via both, but are there sufficient carrots in order to help make change happen fast enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a combination of the two, isn't it? And if there were sufficient carrots to do it, then you wouldn't need some of the sticks which government is introducing. And I think, that is reflective of the scale of the change that needs to occur and the relatively ambitious pace of the change, which of course we all know is absolutely required. And I think against that context, you simply can't rely on the carrots. I think in some cases you will have people with a high environmental conscience who will do this just because it is the right thing to do. The payback upon that will be secondary. For others, it will be all about the payback. And there clearly there is some progress to be made. But the point here is that payback could change quite rapidly with some of the government intervention, particularly, I would say, around the lending sector. And there, if you go and speak to any of the lenders, you can see that they have got a pretty razor-like focus on this particular area. They are much more aware of the EPC profile of their loan book. They're much more aware of what they've got to do to get consumers to improve the energy performance of their homes. So there is some change, but you can't just rely on the carrots. There's going to be some sticks, and at some point, I think there's going to be some pretty big ones. The one that would be the absolute game changer would be if it affected the tax system, if the tax system was directed towards this. But of course, that requires Treasury to be on board, completely on board with this agenda. And that's quite a big, significant change. And we know that big tax changes are often very difficult to put to bed.
We've had thank you. We've had a question from Nick James at Future Ground, pointing out, or at least in his view, that the EPC methodology has significant flaws and limitations. So what are your views on basing such a profound, fundamental policy that affects investment, technological decisions and so on EPCs? Do EPCs and the methodology there need to be altered?
Yeah, I mean, there are a huge number of vagaries, aren't they, around EPCs? Everybody knows that they're a system with significant flaws. But the difficulty is they're probably the best that we've got as things currently stand. And if you need something to hang your hat on to deliver these improvements, you've got to go something which is a readily available measure, however reliable or robust that might be. My suspicion is when the value of your home starts becoming more dependent on the energy efficiency of your property, when the terms of mortgage debt that you're able to get becomes more dependent on your energy efficiency, then you will find that people pay much more attention to those energy performance certificates, and therefore the consumer will require them to be undertaken in a far more robust manner. So no longer will it be with a man with a clipboard racing around your house within an hour. The first point that will come is that when somebody comes to you, your EPC certificate, you will lay all of the evidence out in front of them. And I think increasingly as policy becomes reliant upon it, they're just going to have to become much more robust. Of course, that means that the cost of them will go up. No doubt about that. But, that is, I would say, that's just got to be a necessity as things currently stand. But yeah, there are real flaws, and we know that it's an issue that needs to be addressed.
So change in that respect coming down the line, which would include greater complexity and probably greater cost when it comes to EPCs. Question from Jake Horwood on Bristol Life. Picking up one of the points you made, your stats, of course, are based on Savills' own clients and the perhaps affluence that they have typically. How different would these stats look if it were broader based rather than just Savills' clients?
Yeah, well, my suspicion is that if you sort of looked at it across society as a whole, then I don't think you would have, quite the same perhaps ability to pay more for a home with higher energy performance ratings as you've got within that particular within our client base. But the encouraging thing is that it does, if nothing else, show that there's change. A third of those respondents said that they would be more inclined to pay a premium, or the importance of the energy performance had increased over the period of the last year. And I think that finding is going to be much more widely replicated across sort of wider society.
We'll take a couple more questions. We're coming on to financing, so you've teed that up very nicely. I want to come to a very specific point, which is about this proposed, albeit not yet mandated, government proposal guideline that EPC ratings of C and above are needed for rentals after 2025, including properties which currently can't be updated to that level, physically can't be. So will it happen? And look out from that, what will the consequence of that be? Fewer buy-to-lets, more property sold at reduced values, less rental stock?
Well, look, as we understand it, there will be, if you like, an exemption if the cost of getting to EPCC is more than £10,000. Currently that is an exemption if you need to spend more than £3,000 to get to EPC E. So, in that respect, for landlords who are worried about cost, there is a degree of protection. The issue, of course, is that this is one movement, and if the this is part of a process, if you like, and if the government need to go further, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that they will go further, and they will tighten the requirements from here on in. And I think that is going to put real pressure on some private landlords who already face significant levels of mortgage regulation. That is going, if you like, to shift the emphasis further away from the private landlord towards institutional investments. And I think for tenants, it may well create some issues, because if you don't have the supply of private rented stock, because landlords are less likely to invest, or indeed they're going to look to divest themselves of some of those assets, that will reduce choice for tenants. The choice that there, of course, will be more environmental.
It looks as though just on the very cusp of the final comments.
Efficient, which in many ways is good news, but I turns which we know trade-offs in society, isn't it? It's not a reason not to perhaps looking at the pace at which you do it and how you do it.
Lucian, given the technology but also the time, if I could ask you for quite a short answer to this question. You've mentioned right at the beginning, you prefaced about the massive challenge for government, the cost apparently of 330 billion to achieve these aims to get to net zero. Which is more likely to happen? The target is delayed, or massive government investment happens?
Well, look, I don't think, how much has the government got the finances to be able to provide, very high levels of grant aid for this to occur? I think that's highly unlikely. I think it really just re-emphasizes the scale of the challenge. It's going to mean, inevitably the private sector have to grapple with this. And I think it's a challenging target, when so much of getting towards net zero and achieving this is required on retrofitting of the stock. But equally, that presents huge opportunities for innovation within the private rented sector. I mean, I know, for example, Greg, that you spend pretty much every weekend in your garden shed experimenting with building air source heat pumps so you can sell them in the local farmers market. You're going to be spending, one of the results of this is you are going to be spending a lot more time in your shed. I think the scale of innovation across a whole range of solutions is going to be massive. So there's a lot of opportunity within here if we're going to step up to these challenges.
Well, Lucian, I don't know whether to be inspired or appalled at the thought of spending time in a shed that doesn't exist. A Schrodinger's shed it must be. But I'm going to say, on behalf of everyone here, thank you ever so much for your insights. We will be publishing this as part of our longer form report in our magazines. But on behalf of everyone, Lucian Cook of Savills, thank you very much indeed for your excellent, stimulating presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Very good indeed. Yeah, we'll be publishing that sustainability report next month in our magazines Bath Life, Bristol Life, Cardiff Life and Exeter Living, and a digital version of it. We've had a couple of inquiries about how companies might get involved. We're very happy to talk to you each about that. So let's come on to what we've got coming today. So we'll have a quick look at what's coming shortly. You'll see here we're coming on to finance very shortly. And then there's retrofitting, there's legislation responsibilities, but also opportunities. Quick networking break. We'll come back thereafter with the report from CBRE, from Jeanette, about the commercial sector, then on to the visionaries, and we're going to conclude with a wrap-up session with some of our experts, some of whom have spoken today already. Here's a look, by the way, at some of the companies attending. You'll just get a flavour of the types of businesses which are on board. I'm not going to name check each, but there's many dozens of companies. And thanks for joining us. Please do search some of these out at the networking breaks. It's great that we've got these in attendance. Right, on to financing. Let's bring forward our team here. We want to talk about some of the issues which Lucian has raised, the impacts of sustainability on property financing and costs. How have various financial bodies, such as we have here on this panel, changed their offer or sought to reflect this change? Our panellists, let's see them. Basil Dimarutis, Managing Partner of 4 Partnership, London and Frankfurt-based purpose-driven real estate investment firm and a B Corp. Keris Williams, Innovation Manager. Lucian mentioned about innovation. Keris is the Innovation Manager of Sero Homes, Cardiff-based builder of, quote, only true zero carbon homes, which is fascinating. Chad Griffiths, Senior Relationship Manager on the housing team at Principality. also in Cardiff. By the way, the UK's 6th largest building society, 11 billion of customers' assets under management or involved with. And Chris Ambrose, Exec Director and lead on climate issues for Coutts, the world's 8th oldest bank and another B Corp. Welcome. Morning, our panellists. We were looking for some great insights. I'm going to ask you for a 1-minute pitch, a high-energy start. It's like a little workout routine. I'm going to start with you, Basil. A 1-minute pitch on what For Partnership does and how sustainability issues have impacted you. Go.
Great. Good morning, and thanks for having me. For Partnership is a business I set up about 10 years ago. We're a real estate investment fund management business, so we buy and sell commercial and residential properties as a landlord. The foundational principles, actually, of our business in our DNA was the concept that we could do well and do good at the same time, meaning that we leverage environmental and social outcomes to drive financial outperformance in our portfolio. We own about 1.5 million square feet of real estate, about £1 billion, just shy of £1 billion of property, mostly in this country and also a bit on the continent, as you mentioned.
Very good. Thanks, Basil. Let's bring forward Chad on this. Similarly, from Principality's perspective, how has sustainability specifically impacted your offers?
Morning. Hi, thanks for having me. So Principality, as you said, is a building society. We're based in Cardiff. We've been going since 1860, so a little while. The main retail business focuses on resi mortgages and personal savings, and I work in the commercial lending team, which provides investment and development finance to property investment and developers. I think in terms of sustainability, business has been on a bit of a journey over the last few years, but we're a certified carbon neutral company as of last year, and we're aiming to be net zero in our operations by 2030. I think key for us is bringing our customer base with us on the journey. So on the retail side, we've projects ongoing, looking at how we can help homeowners fund the energy efficiency measures on their properties. And on the commercial side, we're looking at ways we can help our customers both to improve the energy efficiency of their existing assets and make sure that new homes they're developing are fit for the future.
Very good, thank you. And we'll obviously bring the full panel in on more open questions shortly. But Keris now, the same for you with Sero. I guess it's absolutely in the nature of the offer of your company. But talk about the primacy of sustainability in your commercial thinking as a company.
Thank you. Yes, so as you say, it's kind of the proof's in the pudding, really, isn't it? So we were founded in 2017 with the mission of delivering true net zero carbon for both new and existing homes. We're a certified B Corporation and a living wage employer. We already have grown to around 50 people from our Cardiff hub. Now that's quite interesting because when we locked down, there were 11 of us, I think, maybe 12. So we've grown substantially over the last 2 years. Over COVID. So we have 500 new build homes on site right now, with thousands more in the earlier development stages heading towards construction. We as Sero have supported these homes from the design stage through to on-site construction, commissioning, and then onto their operation and maintenance. And then all of these homes are built to provide ongoing data back to Sero and our partners, ensuring the learning from how each unique home operates is fed back. And then on our Optimise Retrofit programme, with significant Welsh Government backing, thankfully, we've got just over 6,000 homes with retrofit measures underway across 30 social landlords in Wales. With Pobl specifically, we're supporting just shy of 650 home retrofit development that will deliver fuel bill savings to social tenants while delivering a return to the landlord, which is Pobl, and helping to balance the national grid as well. And then alongside all of that, a rapidly growing number of financial institutions, we're trialling approaches for how to support and engage homeowners through their secured lending provider. So that's us in a nutshell. That's you in
a reasonably sized nutshell. Thank you. No, not at all. Thank you ever so much. You've got a lot to say because you're almost the proof of Basil's adage, doing good and also doing very well with that rate of growth from 11 to 50 people. So congrats on the development of the business. Coutts, for Chris, a very, very long established business. How has sustainability impacted the nature of your client work and your client offering?
Yeah, of course. So sustainability and purpose more generally is really key to us. So Coutts is part of NatWest and has an ambition to be a leading bank in the UK for climate. So publicly, we've set some very ambitious targets, so kind of halving the climate impact of our financing activities by 2030, obviously on the route to moving towards net zero. And that's the finance activity, that's the emissions of our clients, as well as, of course, our own, which are subject to more stringent targets. So as well as provide about 100 billion of sustainable finance within the next, by 2025. So a part of my role within the bank, of course, is working out how we're actually going to meet those goals. So that means developing kind of accurate models and forecasts, products and kind of services which will incentivize and reward and encourage our clients to make those changes. And also there's a lot of work on how we engage with our clients. We talk about that, making sure our bankers understand the risk and also are explaining those to the client in ongoing discourse. So it's a huge focus for us. And yeah, that's
great. Good. Let's, if we have all panelists together, thank you very much. I want to ask, start from a macro point, which isn't directly about sustainability, but will affect it, which is clearly interest rates are rising and are set, one would imagine, set to rise further after, what, more than a decade of cheap financing. How will that affect future project funding and then come into the sustainability point to the extent it specifically affects that? Who'd like to kick off on that? Perhaps Basil, maybe you've got a different perspective.
And look, I think we can't disconnect our important work around ESG and real estate from the main macro drivers of interest rates, inflation, GDP growth being the holy trinity of things that influence real estate prices. I think, though, particularly in commercial real estate, the winds of ESG are blowing so strong that we're finding that actually our tenants and customers are willing to actually pay higher rents for sustainable green real estate that reflects their own purpose and values, as Chris mentioned, that the all-important purpose word, and helps them with their own strategic ambitions. And that those rising rents and the willingness of tenants to pay those higher rents is outpacing our rising cost of finance. The risk, I would suggest, from not acting in terms of the climate and wider social issues that we face certainly dwarfs the macroeconomic risks as serious as they are.
Yeah, thank you. Chad, for Principality perhaps, there's the macro point about rates rising, the cost of financing getting more expensive. How do you see that coming down the line impacting particularly sustainability projects and funding?
Yeah, I think, over the last 6 months, we've obviously seen residential mortgage rates rise quite significantly. I think it's every sign that base rate is going to continue to rise as inflation carries running on at quite a high level. I think bringing that back down to the project level, on the resi development side, we've seen build costs rising quite significantly over the last 18 months. And that's in terms of labour and materials, and that's obviously had an impact on projects. I think the saving grace on many schemes has been that house prices have been ticking up alongside. So even if some schemes have overrun, they've been saved, if you like, by the increase in house prices. If rates keep rising, that should limit house price growth. So it'll be interesting to see how, if house price growth stalls and you've still got interest, rising costs underneath, potentially land values and build costs, that obviously will have an impact on the viability of projects and how those can be delivered.
Related point, and I'll bring in Chris and perhaps then Keris on this one, which is it's quite clear from Lucian's presentation and common sense as well that the cost of making homes and commercial premises more sustainable will cost, and thereby of itself either drive prices higher or it'll suppress the volume of activity because people will think it's better just to stay where they are rather than pay that premium. What do you think of that point?
Well, I think the risk associated, because the huge cost. So I think kind of the retrofitting of UK stock estimated around 60 to 65 billion, and the lack of clear kind of government subsidies means that's going to have to be borne by, for example, individuals. Now these are people who are already competing with, of course, a higher cost of living. So that's a real factor when you look at our lending, because it increases the risk profile as as there's both for individuals and businesses, there's perhaps less cash to go around. So that'll need to factor into our thinking. And the other thing to consider as well is I've mentioned our targets, and of course nationally a lot of other banks pursuing the same targets. So I think we're going to start to see a real increased delta when it comes to lending between the cost of perhaps less energy efficient properties or businesses versus those which are greener. But a lot of the market flows going towards those greener assets, really driving the interest costs down for those companies, which will be interesting as everyone kind of struggles, and we start to see the market really rewarding or perhaps punishing to some extent the companies who aren't quick enough to transition across.
And thank you. And Keris, what's your take on the fundamental increase in cost of making homes and commercial premises more sustainable, how that will affect how the market plays out in the years to come?
Well, within the residential sector specifically, I undertook some research with the Valuer project with Rightmove, RICS and Monmouthshire Building Society. And I know Lucian flashed up some stats earlier. I have some more positive stats that possibly share a slightly brighter view on things. So we looked at 200,000 pairs of property transactions where they had transacted in the first instance with a lower EPC. They then re-emerged onto the market with an increased EPC. Now, we did take into consideration elements like an increase in square footage. So those properties were removed from that cohort altogether. So the 200,000 pairs of properties were in essence, like for like in most other attributes other than the EPC rating. And actually, there was a clear correlation between the resale price above and beyond the index price of properties within that area. So just to throw a couple of figures at you, if the property had increased by 2 EPC bands, that generally within that cohort of 200,000 increased the value of the property by an excess of 12%, 12.1%. 3 EPC bands equated to roughly 19.5% in and above market trends, and 4 EPC bands, which I do accept would be, a little unlikely, probably not the norm, but it showed an increase of 22% in the value. But also, as we mentioned before, with the increasing cost of running your home, by the end of this year, it's looking like energy is going to be almost, if not in excess of 40 pence per unit. That's crazy money. So it's going to, the repayment times that Lucian showed earlier, I'm assuming were possibly on historic energy efficiency data, whereas now the payback is becoming so much more beneficial because the cost of energy is 4 times what we would have anticipated it to be.
So I mean, as you're citing, the interplay between inflation generally, house price development cost in any as well, but the energy cost rising so profoundly changes the ratio of payback time. I think one of Lucian's stats was it would take 36 years to pay back, which, for a modest gain, most people wouldn't do. But to pick up your point, Keris, and perhaps apply it to the commercial sector, yours is a fundamentally positive perspective, at least in that respect. I wondered if this desire for sustainability will actually encourage businesses to move to more ecologically appropriate premises and thereby push prices, or at least push activity within the sector. What do you make of that? Is there that green premium?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in on that one. And I think on the commercial side, I love those stats you just mentioned. I think they're fantastic. On the commercial side, I think we are finally seeing data which we've been struggling to get for a long time. Some of the brokers, I think JLL came out, Knight Frank came out with recent statistics saying that we were getting something like a 12% rental uplift in real estate, commercial real estate terms, BREEAM, outstanding or excellent, which are the 2 highest bands of BREEAM ratings, and a 10% improvement in rents. And I think that's right. In our experience, we've far exceeded our forecast rent numbers in almost every case. And picking up just a point briefly on payback periods, but we also have to remember the cost of these interventions are dramatically falling. Just pick one, pick solar. I mean, the cost of solar has fallen by something like 70% in the last 5-7 years. So we see on buildings where we're installing solar, be it residential or commercial, payback periods of 5, 6, 7 years. And I think this idea of distributed energy in a rapidly rising energy cost environment and falling cost of the underlying intervention is important.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, who'd be an analyst with so many of these multiple areas moving so rapidly in real time? I mean, God knows what's happened this morning whilst we've been on. I wanted to pick up a question from, or an observation really, from Annie Kelly of Media Clash. And, she's pleased it's been a great discussion and varied angles. This may not be possible, but can we also, if there's knowledge of how other countries are approaching this area, and maybe to learn how sustainability projects in property are funded or approached differently? Basil, you've got some direct experience of that. By the way, when I say other countries, I'm not at all including Wales and England as being other countries, but that's ignore that point. But I'm wondering if there are other opportunities to look elsewhere or instances which you know of, which may be relevant to this point.
Yeah, look, I think each country has taken a bit of a different approach in very much a carrot and stick mindset. I think the stick actually has been pretty effective. If you look at, for example, in the U.S., where in New York City they've got new laws that are going to force costs of carbon onto landlords there if they don't improve the underlying energy performance of the buildings. And I think these are helpful and useful tools. And I think if we need to price in the externalities, and the big externality on environmental, of course, is carbon. And we need a carbon price. We need functioning carbon markets. And we need to realize that we can't continue to consume and produce carbon with impunity. It doesn't work that way. And so things like the carbon tax in New York City and proxies for it here in this country, I think are things that are to be applauded.
Thank you. If I could bring in Chris on this point, and by the way, we will be running other property symposia in the future, and maybe that international piece should be part of it, that exactly bringing in those perspectives, those case studies and so on. Come back to that. But Chris, if I could bring you in on this point, specifically around Coutts' offering, how have you changed some of your, if not financial instruments, but offers to clients? How much of a desire is there for green financing, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, linked to the government as well. So it's that balance between incentivization versus restrictions. So I think restrictions are massively effective. Of course they are. But of course, in the UK, if we were to implement widespread restrictions, is the supply chain sufficient to address that and to allow people to kind of move quickly to meet that great increase in demand? So, as I say, if you look across, for example, Italy, they're hugely subsidising the retrofitting of their individuals. They've got a long-running scheme going for kind of 3 years, which is allowing that industry to develop based on the rewarding clients, and that's very much where we are as a bank. So certainly for our clients, we're offering kind of green mortgages up to £2,000 fee rebates, and for clients who are purchasing or plan to make their properties more energy efficient, and we're not talking at this stage about doing anything beyond that in terms of paring back and making lending more expensive. We don't feel it's the right time. It might be as we move towards 2030 and the supply chain develops and other competitors start to do the same thing. But right now, it's about kind of pushing people over the edge and then making them realise there are benefits beyond just kind of reduced cost. So yeah, kind of encouragement rather than punishment. Certainly can more than stick.
It's really interesting how the competitive element, of course, is always in play in business. And if competitors are doing X in this area that helps develop their brand and position them as smart, forward-thinking businesses picking up this sort of work, then others, of course, will follow. Let's bring in Chad for Principality. Similar point for you, really. Are you seeing that desire? Either from customers or from your offer and how the company is thinking about its offer for that green premium or different financing for more sustainable projects?
Yeah, I think so. So 12 months ago, we launched our Green Development Fund, and that essentially incentivized developers to build better, really. So build low carbon homes, build beyond building regulations. And we incentivize that by lending a bit more than we would on a standard residential project, and by making our fees and interest a bit less to help with the increased costs. So we've seen quite a lot of uptake on that. It's over half committed at the moment. A lot of customers are looking ahead to the Future Home Standard coming in 2025 and thinking, well, we may as well do it now because we know it's coming. So opt in for heat pumps. And yeah, we have seen quite a demand for that. I think coming to Chris's point, as a wider business, we certainly want to take the customer base along with us. We wouldn't want to see restrictions on homeowners, for example, where you've got EPC-D properties and it's quite expensive to retrofit. I think there needs to be a mix of how we fund that. And coming back to the international point, I think it's Canada. I'm trying to rack my brains where it was, but they have loans that are linked to the property, not to the homeowner. So you can sell the property with the loan in the background if you've undertaken retrofit work, because you obviously won't have the benefit of that going forward, which I think is definitely thinking outside the box and have that going forward.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to, we're coming towards the end of this session, by the way, just a few minutes to go. I wanted to come back to Keris, which is, one can define sustainability in multiple different ways, but a different aspect is perhaps the lack of sustainability of the current residential property market and funding model, which doesn't provide anything like what's required of affordable housing in sufficient volumes. What's your take there, Keris? I mean, clearly your organisation is not benefiting from it, but helping drive value and opportunity. But there's not enough, is there? It's not enough affordable housing. The funding model doesn't work at that level currently.
Unfortunately, it's absolutely right. And I'm sat in Wales, which has the oldest housing stock of all of the UK. And yet there are some properties that are horribly inefficient and that will need significant retrofit. Equally, as you said, there's not enough affordable energy efficient housing at the moment. We are trying to tackle that. So the new build element of what we do, there's a social housing and also affordable housing element to those new build developments that we are creating alongside other partners that they're net zero carbon by the early 2030s without any interventions whatsoever. They will require no retrofits. They are already being fueled by ground source heat pumps. They already have photovoltaics and battery storage integrated into the fabric of those homes. But yeah, it's a drop in the ocean to what we actually need. But thankfully, we're very, very lucky in Wales specifically that we have the Welsh Government who are very strongly supporting us in our drive to decarbonise not only sort of new properties, but also the existing housing stock as well. But yeah, so much more needs to be done.
Very good. If I could bring all panellists back on, I want to give a short question. I want a visual answer to this one. So if you think from maybe a year back, show in your hands, where am I? On screen that way, there you go, whether customers are genuinely have greater awareness of the importance of sustainability or less. So if that's stable, are customers less or more? Where would you put it in your experience? Come on, show your hands. Ooh, we're wobbling. Basil's probably the, I don't know the exact gradients of this, but one of the highest at least. It looks to me as though, right the way across the piece, you're right at the pointy end in many ways as financial oriented companies. You are most aware of what consumers and businesses are thinking, and you are all reporting back, whether that or whatever, that there is significant growth. So in awareness at least. So we've got Awareness and financing that we've talked about here. We've got Lucian projecting out about some of the bigger macro challenges. And I'd like to close this session by thanking everyone watching on your behalf for our panelists. Basil from For Partnership, Keris from Sero Homes, Chad from Principality, and Chris from Coots. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mentioned the Property Awards earlier that we run in Bath, Bristol, Cardiff and Exeter, and here's some more info on our Property Awards.
Valuable connections, new business relationships and partnerships are at the core of our Property Awards in Bristol, Bath, Cardiff and Exeter. All areas of the property value chain come together at these uniquely powerful events, covering resi and commercial. From architects to agents, from developers, suppliers, consultants, to legal and financial property experts, all the leading players are involved in our Property Awards. They feature high-value networking events, launches and receptions. Then must-attend daytime awards, plus convivial business meetings. All backed by multiple-channel, multiple-month marketing from the region's leading events organiser and magazine publisher, Media Clash. In print, on social and in person. We're proud of the support we have been given for the Property Awards. Proud also to play our part in promoting your dynamic sector. Please talk to us about how we can showcase what you do at the Bristol, Bath, Cardiff or Exeter Property Awards.
We're very proud to put on these Property Awards, and it's quite clear that there's great connections and a terrific amount of business which is done directly from them. So thank you for your support for those. Our next panel is about retrofitting, repurposing, reimagining, the impact of legislation on property, specifically around those areas, but how older properties can be recast for future realities. Let's bring forward our panelists. Helen Rumford, partner and head of team at GA Energy, Bespoke Energy Law Service, one of our sponsors today. Sam Goss, founding director of the REBA award-winning Bristol-based Barefoot Architects. And Simon Peacock, head of UK regions and lead director for Bristol, Cardiff and Exeter for JLL, one of the world leaders in real estate services, nearly 100,000 employees, 80 countries, quite extraordinary business and multiple perspectives. We're going to begin with you, Simon, if we may. Given precisely that point, your scale and much of your client base, your work presumably has longer time horizons. So let's talk through some of your recent projects or thinking about how you can advise on a future which is being frequently rewritten.
Yeah, sure, Greg. Well, I guess it's the framework that we're going to sit in. We've got a UK government, if I keep it UK, UK government, which obviously has set that 2050 target, is then kind of looking in terms of legislation, in terms of what to bring out to kind of encourage us all or push us all in terms of the kind of standards we need to meet to get towards that. At the moment, that seems to be coming in a myriad of different consultations. So you've got energy performance certificates, which are going to get tougher and harder, as it were, as we go forward. Building regulations improvements. So one coming out literally next month will mean that buildings have to be 30% more carbon efficient. So that's coming through. And an interesting one is performance based, where they actually measure what you use rather than what you theoretically designed it to do. Using kind of probably an Australian system is the kind of favoured Neighbours, not named after the soap opera, I should point out, which is due to come in as well. So with the weight of all that coming through, there's a lot there to kind of, I suppose, really encourage. But I think the bit I would say that we see a lot of is occupier demand. So the people that are using these spaces really wanting that. From our surveys and research, both UK and globally, there's a disconnect. There's more occupiers wanting greener space and better space than investors are currently providing. There's always a lag in our industry in a longer term around that. And also our research shows that we look back over about 8 years of data and we've been able to demonstrate that greener, more sustainable buildings are actually achieving higher rentals, like 6 to 11% sort of uplift, lower void periods. You'll probably hear from other panel members on other sessions today, lower and cheaper cost finance as well around that. And all of that is offsetting the extra capital costs that you may have to spend on those buildings when you're looking at the longer term. And I appreciate there's more complexities for certain people who may want to come into the market and then come out again in terms of taking that longer term view. And with the weight of all that that's happening, the valuation of your properties, the concern is the market is starting to price that in now in looking at whether you want to call it a green premium or a brown discount effectively. But, if you haven't got your building hasn't got a plan in place to get it to meet the requirements and the occupier demands, then the market will start pricing that down.
I'll come on precisely to that point with Helen from GA Energy in just a second. I want to just replay something of what you've said there. In terms of your research, if there's stronger demand than availability, if there's a premium to value of subsequent buildings, surely that means two things. One, opportunity for developers, but two, greater value gain as well. So net, that sounds extremely positive, at least commercially.
Yeah, I think, that is exactly the case. It takes time. We're working on, in Bristol, CEG's office building EQ, which is kind of going to be net zero operationally, and that's had huge demand. Halo, we're working for QX on that one, BREEAM Outstanding, and that's been very well in terms of the market. But those are kind of, I appreciate I'm picking some real kind of premium products there. It's I suppose the concern, and I think we've had conversations with Bristol City Council, for example, is about the rest that's left behind and how they get lifted up. And I think that's part of the issue is making sure we have a just transition in this, and I think we're all experiencing that, and there's a lot of debate about that with energy prices and everything else that's going on as well. So there's challenges around that.
Right, thank you. Let's bring in Helen for GA Energy and talk about your principal role here, and perhaps specifically around that area of helping businesses sort themselves out in terms of more sustainable approach to their offices.
So basically, I help clients to build and operate renewable energy projects across the UK, particularly ground-mounted and rooftop solar as well. So what I was hoping to do is just talk through rooftop opportunities, really, which is what businesses are asking me most about at the moment, given the price increases of electricity and trying to secure long-term prices for your electricity at low cost. So a typical, and not mentioning clients' names at all, but a typical office building rooftop solar. So if you have a roof space that's about the size of, say, a tennis court, you could put about 125 panels, 100 to 125 solar panels on that roof space, which would give you 50 kilowatt or thereabouts installation. And the price for that, for an office, so is typically around £615 per kilowatt of installation. So a rooftop area the size of a tennis court is going to cost you about £31,000 for all install costs. That's equipment, professional fees, everything all in from start to finish. The payback for that business, without mentioning names, is about 5 years. And after that 5 years, they're going to be getting basically free electricity from their solar panels for the next 25 to 30 years. So it's something that is very attractive to businesses right now that want to secure that long-term reduced electricity cost and to be able to generate their own electricity from rooftop solar.
And could I check on GA's role here is almost to broker the relationship between the landlord, the need to plug into the grid, the energy suppliers and so on, and basically to make sure it happens in a coherent legal way. Is that how it works?
Yes. So basically, for all solar installations, including rooftop installations, there are 3 legal requirements, which is where we get involved as lawyers. So you've got your land rights. You need to make sure that you own your building. You need to be able to own your building or lease it, or at least lease the roof space to be able to install your own solar. So we deal with the land rights. Then you've got planning permission. So most small installations will be under permitted development, but we will look at that for you. The government are expanding permitted development now, so to include more larger scale installations. So hopefully it's something that will need to be looked at as part, and that's something that we do, but hopefully will be included within permitted developments that you don't need planning. And then the third legal requirement is your connection documents. So that's something we will help you with as well. So it's looking at notifying or getting consent from your local network operator, and also having your offtake agreement or power purchase agreement with your electricity supplier that basically agrees to take any excess that you're not using on site, and also agrees to supply you electricity if for any period your solar panels are not generating. So there are 3 legal requirements we get involved with: your land rights, your planning permission, and your grid connection.
Yeah, and
there are opportunities around if you don't own or if you haven't got the install costs that I can talk about, but the opportunities where we get involved connecting people with local community groups who can help you if you don't have your upfront costs for installation, and they might be able to offer you where they cover the install costs. They'll own the panels, but they'll sell the electricity to you at a much reduced price. So we also get involved when you're leasing rooftops to solar groups as well.
Well, you're pulling together 2 or 3 threads there. One is Lucian's point about the need and opportunity for innovation. 2, if there is that capital return, or return on capital rather, as profound as it is, that will come to Simon's point about the overall value and interest in this sector. I will come back to a third point, which I'll come on to when we've had a chat with Sam. But the third point is about the amenability of councils to helping businesses develop their real estate such that they get the opportunity you've just described. Whereas with you, Sam, with Barefoot, retrofitting, or maybe the word is not quite distinct for you, but it really means reimagining existing properties. So perhaps you might talk us through a recent example of where you've taken a pre-existing, maybe slightly less loved property, and in a very specifically sustainable way have helped develop it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I think I'd sort of echo what everybody else has said, that the challenges that we face are enormous and the opportunities are fantastic. And, a project in Bristol that we worked on in Bedminster on East Street on the Parade was for a very unloved building, formerly Motorman Car Parts and Spares. And we had an opportunity to develop that into new ethical supermarket for the Bristol Loaf, and to create 9 apartments on the upper levels. And rather than demolish the entire building, we worked very carefully to retain the entire ground floor structure and all of the foundations. So all of the embodied carbon, significant amounts within the foundations and the superstructure were retained. And then we were able to reimagine that completely wholesale by placing a much lighter weight new steel structure on the top. And that created a series of other opportunities for very high performance new homes. A lightweight structure, again, created much more value for the owner developer of the site. And he recognized the benefits of creating a better design scheme with higher qualities of natural light, and that all of those things would create longer term secure tenants who were happier in their homes. And the myriad benefits that this created played out so quickly upon completion. They let out over the course of a weekend, and it's become a kind of local landmark, really. So at that scale, the way in which I think we need to bring creativity to these sort of unloved, disused bits of the city is really exciting. And I think it's about the attitude and the values that we bring to it. And certainly what we're seeing is exactly what Simon has said. It's being driven by our clients. It's being driven by consumers. It's being led by not legislation so much, but the demand of people to live in better homes. And I think there's this sort of exciting moment that we're in, of almost like the perfect circumstances to see the industry step up. And I think the Southwest and Bristol is extremely well placed to do that. Yeah.
Okay, and thank you for that very latter point. I think we'll come on to in our sort of wrap-up panel about the role of the West and South Wales perhaps potentially being an exemplar area. I want to come back to that council point, or rather more generally civic bodies, and how proactive, receptive they are, and perhaps Simon and Helen specifically on that, if you'd like to comment on the support that your clients have had from councils, etc.
Yeah, I suppose I guess that kind of centres around, for a number of our schemes, that's through the planning process. Obviously, that comes through quite heavily. It's always a tricky one to kind of navigate through sometimes in terms of kind of some of these urban locations. But I would say from a council point of view, that they're very enthusiastic around obviously providing green, future-proofed buildings. That hasn't been an issue in that particular area, and a lot of our clients and occupiers' clients are leaning into that. So that's great. I guess the issue that we're only just in discussion with them on is the kind of the scale of change. So I agree entirely with Helen and Sam, but there is a lot of people behind who the legislation will catch, and that will push up. That's going to push landlords into doing more work on buildings which currently they probably have no plans to, but will need to, and that will obviously need to be recouped in some way. So that could push rents up for some of those kind of smaller businesses, etc., across the city. And I think the council and ourselves are kind of in conversations around that, for example, just to try and understand what the scale of that sensitivity may be and how we can manage that in a sensible way, and whether the council steps in to maybe try and support certain groups and communities in that transition.
So thank you. For Helen and Sam, similarly supportive planning authorities, councils and so on, or have you encountered any hurdles in the processes you've been engaged in?
For me, I found that local authorities, councils are actually very supportive of the projects that we've been involved with and my clients have been involved with more declaring climate emergencies, so unlocking funds to be able to support more projects. So I think for the projects that I've been involved with, we've been very lucky to have quite supportive councils. Things do take time, so when you're dealing with councils and local authorities, things can take time to make decisions, but the enthusiasm is there. So yeah.
All very positive. Sam, do you concur?
I'd say it's a very mixed environment out there within the planning world. I mean, our focus is housing of all scales. And I think what we're seeing is, and my reading of the scenario that we're in is that sustainable design necessitates things which look different, which may be designed out of different materials, which aren't necessarily going to be in keeping with the surrounding context, which in many scenarios isn't very good anyway. Yet there is a resistance and a hesitance for planners to sort of step up and accept and acknowledge that. And I think there is a bit of a lag here that we're experiencing. And like with most things at the moment, I think this sort of disruptive change to the retrofit world isn't being kept up with by planning legislation, I don't think. So I think we're seeing a wave that's ahead of the governmental curve. And it is causing us issues, particularly in time of planning determinations, where frankly, they should be biting our arm off for some of these sorts of projects.
Well, okay, I'm going to bounce it back to you. If you were Prime Minister for the day, and that might be quite an interesting experience in these current times, what changes would you wish to enact in terms of legislation? It's a big or a tiny question, depending on how you answer it.
Me personally?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that they need to have a comprehensive retrofit strategy, which is all-encompassing. I think it needs to really look at finance and the point at which projects are undertaken. I think we're in a unique moment, actually, of high energy prices, high property values, and a great deal of turnover. So again, within the residential sector that we're working, we're seeing a lot of change. And those clients that are coming to us, they want to retrofit their homes. They're releasing equity from their properties, and they have a great moment to change things. And I think if the government insisted that at the point of sale, if an EPC rating is lower than a C or a D, then the banks and the government need to insist that that EPC level rating is raised to an A or a B in order for it to occur. And I think that would be a quite dramatic shift.
It's going to be a dramatic shift. I think it's one that Lucian said was, if that were mandatory, that's actually, I can't remember his exact phrase, but was actually quite unlikely because the consequences are so profound. But legislation is always going to be, difficult to imagine. But I want to come on to one legislative point, if I may, for you each. Perhaps talk us through some of those legislative impacts, especially in this post-Grenfell world. Who pays? How's that going to work out?
It's time to start.
Yeah, please, Simon.
Yeah. So I suppose Sam just picked on it in terms of the EPC. The government's obviously, as I said earlier, kind of got a programme of kind of lifting up to EPC B by 2030, or that's their plan. That's obviously puts a baseline for everyone, really, that's got to be in there. I just thought I'd put a kind of the degree of scale of this. If I just take the office market, so that's 86% of Bristol okay, offices would need to be improved in the next 8 years.
Wow.
Okay, so if we take a snapshot of how much leasing is kind of done within the city, probably about 600, maybe 700,000 square feet if you add that on with what new comes in. There's about 13 million square feet out there. So that suddenly you jumped to a need every year to be doing 1.7 million odd of refurbishment. And the reason I make that point between what being let, because a lot of people are thinking, well, when the tenants move out, that's when I'll do my refurb. But what I'm kind of saying is actually, that isn't quick enough. That's not going to meet that requirement because there isn't enough traded volume that's going on out there. So we're seeing clients who are looking at their buildings and realizing how much they've got to uplift it. And it's going to be very messy and disruptive and complicated. And effectively easing tenants out to new locations so they can get the whole building back to do a proper job. That's a Bristolian phrase for you. But on the whole building. And so there's kind of, I can see, I mean, Sam and Helen, maybe, getting contractors now is hard. The idea that we're gonna triple the rate, and it won't happen straight away. So it'll all build up towards the end. There's a lot of work to be done, I suppose, is what I'm saying off the back of that. And that's just targeting the minimum EPCs, not what some of the occupiers are wanting, which is net zero.
So if there's a lot of work to be done, and you've adumbrated an extraordinary scale of activity just in the one city of Bristol, magnificent city though it is one city. Who are the beneficiaries of that? If you could, cheeky question, if you were to invest in any particular company other than your own, which sectors would you invest in who might be the beneficiaries of this sheer amount of work that's going to come down the line?
I'm minded of the kind of the gold rush, and who built the gold mines didn't make the money. It was the guys selling the shovels. So I'm probably going to stick to. I think there's a lot of work in that retrofitting and circular economy, I should plug, approach, which will lead to kind of in the contracting market to actually deliver this to do the work. There's currently a massive shortage of skilled talent around that, and also in the analysing of the data and modelling of the particular buildings, because whilst I'm making it sound relatively simple, there's quite a bit of analysis that needs to be done to understand where you're targeting your money in that building, whether that building is on heat or cool basis, what strategy you should take, whether you should be doing air tightness or insulation, etc., and which route you should be going.
And perhaps Helen or Sam, with maybe not your businesses necessarily, but with your clients' activities, are they experiencing shortfalls on expert availability of different skill sets? Is that an inhibitor to change?
I mean, at the moment, we haven't seen this surge of activity start yet. So we haven't seen a shortfall of, I think that will come, which is, I think why it's really important for businesses to start now. So to start thinking well ahead of the sudden surge of activity. And it will be a holistic approach. So if you're looking at improving energy efficiencies, retrofitting, insulation, and everything, you really want to be doing it all at once. So certain things will take minimal disruption, like rooftop solar actually takes minimal disruption, and you can carry on with your tenant in the building while it's taking place. But other things won't. So if you want everything to happen at once, there's going to be a big demand on contractors. But that's why it's really important for businesses to start thinking about it now, so that we're not all trying to do it at the same time.
Sam, for you, similar points?
Yeah, similar. I mean, I think the sort of angle of direction, or the direction of travel we're seeing, is natural and electric. So, as a practice, the circular economy is very important, cradle to cradle products. We're steering away from petrochemical borne insulants like PIR, and we're moving into wood fiber. I think in terms of the sort of upfront design knowledge in the UK, I think is exceptional. I think we have got many different kind of standards that are being promoted for the retrofit go-to. So we've got PAS 2035, we've got Letty's retrofit, AECB have a standard. There are lots of different toolkits out there to follow. Passive House Trust have got Enefit. The shortage that our clients are seeing is the skilled contractors to install and undertake the work. And it is a real problem, actually. And I think that's something that we could address, and the city could do a great job to attack, really.
Talking of the city, thank you. We've had a comment and question from Tom Clark of Greenflare, renewable energy experts. He's saying the majority of new build and retrofit projects are not getting planning approval without the installation of renewables. He's saying we're actually lucky, and you don't often see this, companies praising councils. I think we're actually lucky that Bristol City Council are ahead of the curve with the insistence of including renewables in developments. Have you found this, whether Bristol or elsewhere, just to pick that point?
Bristol's very good. Yeah, they're definitely pushing a lot harder than other local authorities. You know, many other local authorities, they don't even require a sustainability statement at the point of submission of an application for a major project, which is kind of criminal, really. So yeah, I think Bristol are doing well in many respects.
This is it's all very communautaire. Each of the sessions so far have been very supportive and encouraging, I think. I hope people are taking good inspiration from it. I'm going to come to the last couple of questions as we come towards the end of this session. It's an impossible question, really. We're going to ask it anyway. If you could sum up top tips for your clients in short order, what might you be saying to anyone watching this? What should they be thinking about doing and when? Helen, perhaps pick with you.
Yes, so I would encourage top tips. So I would encourage immediate action on things you can do straight away with minimal cost. So just to give half an hour in your agenda, your board meeting, to think about things you can change now. So that might be looking at, how much printing you do in the office, how much office travel you do, how you travel, whether you have electric vehicles, whether that's possible. So immediate things you can do with the resources you already have. And then the next top tip is for me, is to look at rooftop solar and opportunities if you own your own building. And then it's opportunities if you don't own your own building. We haven't got into today, but I can talk about another time. But there are opportunities out there, immediate steps and things you can think about doing that take some time and a bit of cost, but in the next sort of 1 to 3 years.
And at the risk of being pretty egregious about it, if any of you have some great top tips you have for clients, there are vehicles such as Bristol Life, Bath Life, Cardiff Life and Exeter Living, which you can avail yourselves of to get that word out there. Let's come to Sam on this point. Top tips for clients, please.
Top tips, I think, develop a strategy for how over the next 10 years you're going to address the retrofit of your building. I think assess it, look at what its current state is, what the problems are, the issues, and then I think establish the different stages you will take to insulation, the fabric. Ventilation, I think, is absolutely key and often misunderstood. And then I think also, obviously, your kind of primary heat source and supply. So I think developing that strategy early on and then biting it off as you go. And if you're thinking about doing a more comprehensive project, focus on the retrofit rather than the extension or addition of more space necessarily.
And Simon, you've already made a similar point about don't wait until point of exit. Get on with it now. But perhaps some other tips for you would give to your clients.
Yeah, I mean, I echo Sam's point really around kind of if you're an investor, developer, you really need to get your head around what's coming in terms of legislation, what your occupier market is after, and have a plan. I think if you're an occupier, I would say you need to think about where your next step is. Most of the file researchers, most of them want to move to a new place, and if a new location or even a current one, which is a lower carbon, but that's going to take a bit of time. They need to look into the market because it's quite compressed out there at the moment in terms of the offer and what's out there. And then we've echoed it a bit before, but I'll just make a plea in terms of people moving and transforming their space, particularly post-COVID world, etc., and they're throwing their desks out and bringing sofas in. They really need to think about that product is not a waste; it is a resource, and thinking circular economy principles in everything they do. We've released a number of our own offices. It's old-fashioned stuff. It's reupholstering furniture and bringing things back and kind of repair and reuse is fundamental, and we've saved huge amounts of carbon going to that route. So sometimes there might be a rush in this world now to suddenly start moving to smaller, better spaces. But think about what you're taking with you and reusing it and donating it and looking at it from that perspective.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me as though somewhere on a scale between an audit of businesses, of premises is required, but some of those, frankly, sort of smaller actions as well, as Simon has mentioned, each of you has mentioned. that it need to be taken. I'll come back to Simon for a closing question in a moment. We've just had a question from Laura Alice of Green Flare. Amongst the many things we've not touched on, it's we can't do everything, I guess. She's saying she's not heard heat pumps or batteries mentioned. Why is this? But really, what would you advise? Actually, I'm going to go to Sam on that one. I think it's probably closer to your territory. Heat pumps, certainly.
We're installing heat pumps on every single new housing project we're doing in the UK at the moment. It is the go-to technology. We're frequently seeing all electric systems. And I would, to link up with Helen, I'd say we've also installed a PV microgrid on a community-led housing project down in West Dorset, which is a Bristol-run company called CPro have established it. It has a battery storage centre. Every roof is south-facing, generating electricity stored in the batteries, and then an ESCO, an energy supply company, has been established that sells electricity at low cost back to the residents if they want it, to support their heat pumps and MVHR units and provide direct electric heating for any additional heat load. It's, you know, that is the future. So absolutely, everybody's doing it.
Thank you. And to Laura's point, of course, there are multiple other areas, and we will revert to these in subsequent symposia. A short last question, if I may, to Simon, that JLL has the advantage of global status. So is there any sense, as you determine it, of the UK being a leader when it comes to issues of sustainability and property, or a laggard?
I'm going to go leader. Okay, so I'm going to that's from our point of view in terms of the research and the data that we're kind of pushing out around the commercial market in particular. I will pause slightly to say I am struck by sometimes we're having a conference with housing associations. We had a number of Scandinavian associations in there with them, and they were baffled as to why we were talking about sustainability so much, because it's just what they do. Okay, so I'm afraid there's a bit of a bounce down to ground about that. And I think you know, it's certainly coming into our. But we look in other locations. I think America is a mixed bag. It's got some states which are doing phenomenal stuff, but as a collective, not very well. And obviously, Middle East becomes challenging as well. So, and then interesting, Australia may lag in some areas in terms of its economy and its mineral approach, but in terms of some of the legislation it's doing is world leading, and we're adopting that. So I think we want to encourage everyone to kind of on this and share all the ideas. That's how we're going to get there.
Well, to my question earlier about being Prime Minister for the day, perhaps, Simon, you should consider that with that deftly navigated answer, which seemed to please everyone, but being with sufficient grit to it as well. So well done you. Well done all our panellists, and I'd like to thank them on your behalf. Helen from GA Energy, Simon, JLL's Head of Regions, and Sam from Barefoot Architects. Thank you very much indeed. That's great. Thanks. We're about to have a short networking break, but here's just a quick look at some of the stuff which will be happening subsequent to that. You'll see it coming up shortly that there's a couple more sessions to run, but the principal one is the research on commercial property from CBRE. So we've got this networking break through till 11:15, maybe a couple of minutes after, but there's Jeanette will come back subsequently. Then our visionaries, the new built environments and so on. And then our expert panel. Thanks very much for watching so far. Please do use the networking session to reach out to some of the brilliant companies we've got watching today. See you shortly. Thank you.
a good feeling, yeah. Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah.
Yes, I can. Doubt, better leave. I'm running with this plan. Pull me, grab me, crabs in the bucket can't have me. I'll be the president one day. January 1st. Oh, you like that gossip? Like you the one drinking what gossip.com. Now I got a word for your tongue. How many Rolling Stones you want? Yeah, I got a brand new spirit speaking and it's done. Woke up on the side of the bed like I won. Talk like the wind in my chest to that sun. G5 in the US to Taiwan. Now who can say that? I wanna play back. Mama knew I was a needle in a haystack. Oh, Body Boy, plus Maybach. I got a feeling it's a rap. ASAP.
Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah. Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling.
The mountaintop, walk on water. I got power, feel so royal. 1 second, I'ma strike for you. Diamond, platinum, no more for you. That adrenaline, never giving in. Giving up's not an option, gotta get it in. Witness, I got the heart of 20 men. No fear, go to sleep in the lion's den. That glow, that spark, that crown. You're looking at the king of the jungle now. Stronger than ever, can't hold me down. 100 miles gunning from the pitch's mile. Straight game face, it's game day. See me running through the crowd, full of melee. No trick plays, I'm Bill Gates. Take a genius to understand me.
Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah. Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling. Get a good feeling, yeah. Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah. Sometimes
Welcome back. Hope you made some good contacts. Virtual speed networking, eh? You can do some real proper networking at our Property Awards. I'm going to talk about that in a sec before we come on to this great thought leadership piece from at CBRE. We would like to give thanks to our current roster, I stress current roster of sponsors for our Property Awards. They are, from the top, 24/7 Property Auctions, Allied Hire, APS Homes, AWW, Clark Bond, Close Brothers, Fine and Country, Halsall, Hampshire Trust Bank, Hydrock, JAS Building Services, Marsh Commercial, MDA Consulting, and Miziato Design and Build, NE Appliances, Planning Portal, Redland Court, Juniper Homes, Refine, Sanctuary Financial, Savills, Shawbrook Bank, and our last batch. It is, I mentioned earlier about stellar cast of presenters. This is a stellar lineup of sponsors, and we're very grateful for their support. The last group, Spaces, Regis, SWBF, Southwest Business Finance, Triangle, Vertex Investment, Wilmot Dixon, last alphabetically, major company, YTL Developments. We're very, very proud to have your support, and of course for those other several leading commercially adroit, clever companies who'll be joining as Property Awards sponsors in the coming months. Bound to be a few. These are great gatherings of leading property professionals in each of the cities. Let's come on to this special bespoke research on the commercial property sector from Jeanette Siebritz, Exec Director and Head of UK Research at CBRE. Jen is a housing market economist with over 20 years experience, leads CBRE's residential research teams, having set it up 15 years ago, oversees all residential analysis and research, and acts as a consultant for a large number of public and private sector clients. On research, Jen focuses on the big issues in the real estate world, identifying trends, analysing the market, providing clients with unrivaled insight and support. Jen, absolutely delighted for you to join us today, and the floor is yours to talk through your insights, and we'll come on to some questions. Please, by the way, please do ask questions during this, and we'll get in as many as we can. Jen, the floor's yours.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. So I'm going to go to what is always the most nervous part of any meeting, and that is to see whether I can share my screen properly. So let me do that. Well, it's still... Okay, so are you able to see just the one slide that says sustainability issues for commercial real estate?
We can indeed, and we're looking forward to the insight, so thank you.
Excellent. Right, okay. I am going to turn off my video because I found with bitter experience that the less you have going on, the less it's likely to impact the Wi-Fi. So, but I will turn my video back on when it's time for questions. So, look, why are we all here today, talking about sustainability? I mean, there's been this seeming growing groundswell of consciousness. I mean, why is that? Is it we've just all woken up, opened up our eyes and really become aware of the issues and the long-term impact of sustainability? It could be. I mean, COVID did accelerate many trends, online shopping, working from home. Maybe this is another trend that has been amplified. Health and well-being became such a focus for everyone. And also, we were able to monitor the direct impact that our livelihoods was having on the environment. This came into sharp focus. I'm thinking particularly about things like air quality, and how pollution improved during lockdown because of fewer cars on the road. It could also be rocketing energy prices, which forces us to review our energy uses. And this is probably the key factor: money. While it would be lovely to think we're all altruistic, interested in improving, sustainability for noble reasons, it's when the financial consequences come clear that we start to act. And there are direct financial consequences for the property sector. There are physical risks for the sector, the impact on things like rising sea levels and flooding, drought, water scarcity on buildings. I mean, these can cause financial losses, both insured and uninsured. Higher temperatures are also leading to overheating in buildings. So there's a need to retrofit air conditioning systems. This can be hugely costly if it wasn't anticipated in the original design. And of course, there are longer term financial consequences associated with regulatory changes. The property sector, along with others, needs to transform to meet government targets, and this is costly. But if it's not done, there's a risk of ending up with stranded assets. And this is the transition risk, when to undertake these changes. So let's start at the beginning. What are the UK targets? Now, I'm sorry, you've probably all heard this before, but it's a good bit of background information, and there may be someone who wants a reminder. So the UK target, in accordance with the Paris Agreement, is to reduce UK greenhouse gases by 68% by 2030. That's compared with 2019 levels. And then by 2035, greenhouse gas emissions need to be 78% lower. And there's the aim then of reaching net zero by 2050. Now, there are numerous ways of breaking down where the CO2 emissions come from. We know businesses produce about 27% of all emissions. Some of this will be related to the built environment, some heating, but there's going to be other aspects of the built environment not captured. So the pie chart provides a different breakdown. It focuses on building. It shows that around 40% of UK CO2 emissions come from the built environment. So building operations, so that's the running of buildings, the heating, the lights, it's about 28%. And then there's a further 11%, which is for building materials and construction. But of course, it's not evenly split across all real estate. About 70% is for resi, but I'm going to talk primarily about commercial real estate. And according to CREM, commercial real estate assets need to reduce CO2 emissions by 94% by 2050. I mean, that is huge. So what guidelines do we have? What are the mechanisms that's going to get us there? The 10-point plan, which is, and I quote, the approach government will take to build back better, support green jobs and accelerate our path to net zero. Covers a range of topics, and the 7th point is greener building. And we have things like MEES and EPC and the heat and building strategy, and I'll talk about these a little bit later. But now I just want to turn now and say, well, what does this mean for real estate? So we surveyed over 200 of our clients to understand where they all are on this journey. It was very comprehensive, but for the purpose of this talk, I focused on 4 big issues that we've identified from our findings, and these are the need for a wider and deeper strategic coverage of sustainability issues, tightening regulation, a need to better understand the green premium, and then a need to set out the right path to net zero. So firstly, there is this need for a wider and deeper coverage of the issues by the sector. We asked our clients which sustainability issues featured in their corporate strategy. There were some positive responses. Around 60% of respondents said that they were reducing green gas emissions and improving health and well-being, and that these had major coverage in their corporate strategy. Now, of course, if I was a glass half empty person, I'd be worried that 40% of clients that weren't addressing the issue. And this is, I guess, is part of the concern. Even now, when ESG is top and centre, it's not featuring in all corporate strategies. And some aspects have really poor coverage. I mean, at the bottom of the chart, you can see biodiversity. Our findings show that biodiversity is rarely seen as a priority in real estate decision-making. 45% of occupiers and 33% of investors said it had no or minimal coverage in their own corporate sustainability or social responsibility strategies. This is tragic. It's so important. You know the rhetoric. We lose the bees and we lose humanity. But if we don't care about the flowers and the fauna, I think talking dollars, again, may help. So the UK Environment Act was going to be a wake-up call to investors and developers, quite frankly. The Act, which has recently received royal assent, requires a 10% biodiversity net gain, which, as I can't say it, I'm going to shorten to BNG. And this will be a condition of planning permissions for all developments across England and Wales. So BNG is going to be calculated using the biodiversity metric 3.0 and is based on habitats. So habitats are going to get biodiversity units, and this is going to be based on distinctiveness and condition and strategic significance to wider biodiversity goals. And this is going to be used to identify which habitat types need to be enhanced, which must be restored, and which must be created to deliver this 10% requirement. Now, BNG can be achieved off-site, on-site, or via a government credit system. So off-site options mean that developments can still be granted planning permission where a 10% gain couldn't be achieved on-site. But the metric does include an additional risk multiplier applying to off-site options. And this has the potential to make BNG more challenging by off-site interventions. And also DEFRA estimates that off-site options is going to be more costly than on-site. I mean, not least due to the need to purchase additional land. It's also worth noting that the Act requires the 10% BNG to be maintained for at least 30 years after development completion. So for all of those who are not worried about biodiversity or it's not in their corporate strategies, need to have a really strong rethink at the moment. So now, next is everyone's favourite subject, regulation. Now, I'm not going to cover off finance and investment regulation requirements because I know there's a separate session on this, but I did just want to highlight it so you didn't think I was just ignoring it. But I am going to focus on EPC. So the minimum EPC is going to be lifted from E to B by 2030. Now, over the last 11 years, under 100,000 EPCs at B or better have been issued. We need at least another 1 million of these such EPCs to be issued by 2030. So that means the rate of B or better issuances needs to grow at 36% per annum. Now, currently, the number of B or better is growing at under 13%. And at that rate, sufficient EPCs will not have been issued till at least 2040. But, I like to play a bit of devil's advocate. I mean, is EPC really the correct measure? I mean, this chart actually shows that there is very little difference between the median energy intensity in offices across all EPC grades. So of course, the little red flag in the back of my head now is saying that this suggests we might be in for more regulations. So now let's turn to another issue, which is a favourite of everyone, and that is the green premium. So look, if you do a straightforward direct comparison, there is about a 10% rental premium for commercial real estate with green features. But look, it's really difficult to disentangle all the factors that combine to drive rents. So for example, you'd expect a prime property in a prime location to have good green credentials. So how much of the premium of rental premium of this property, when compared to assets with less good green credentials, is location, or is about being prime, or again, is about the ESG features? I mean, we know at the moment there is a flight to quality, and there is a growing divergence in rental growth between secondary and prime assets. So is this distorting the analysis? I mean, is there really a green premium? We really don't know. It could be the weight of money. We know there's a huge wave of capital looking for ethical investments and strong demand for buildings which can be put into their green or ethical portfolios. Now, if this demand outstrips the supply of buildings with adequate green features, we will expect prices to rise for those buildings, almost irrespective of whether the tenants want the green features. But of course, some things that appear to attract a premium probably shouldn't, and I take you back to my EPC chart. I mean, why should there be a premium for EPC B versus EPC D when the energy performance is actually similar? Now, of course, the other factor to consider is whether the green premium will quickly turn into a brown discount. Markets, as we know, will reduce the price of something that's in low demand, as well as increasing the price of something that's in high demand. And we could soon see green features being expected, the norm. So pricing will fall for those assets without green credentials. Now, I'm going to turn to the route to net zero. Now, for the built environment, there is net zero for construction and then net zero for operational. So, don't want to get too technical, but, a building, is net zero carbon in construction when the amount of carbon emissions associated with its production is, zero or negative through the use of offsets at the time that of practical completion. But it's zero carbon in operation when the carbon emissions is negative and on the operational energy. And it can be highly energy efficient and powered from on-site and off-site with renewable energy sources, with any remaining carbon balance offset. But to be honest, I don't think many people know how to get to the end goal. I mean, there's so many definitions and so many different formula of whether this is net zero or not. So let's just think for a moment from the operational side. I mean, the UK's government's heat and building strategy is the government route to reach zero emissions from buildings, but it doesn't lay out a clear pathway to achieving this. I mean, the transition away from fossil fuel heating systems to low carbon alternatives like heat pumps is a key pillar of the strategy. Now, this chart shows the rate at which heat pumps installations will need to be installed to meet this target. It shows that installations must increase by around 50% each and every year to hit the 2028 target. But the dark blue block shows the levels of heat pumps that will be subsidised with the scheme. So there's a massive gap. But also the strategy risks falling at the first hurdle. For heat pumps to work, thermal efficiency in much of the existing stock needs to be improved. And this has not been comprehensively addressed by the strategy at all. Now, only a small share of the 3.9 billion of spending announced, about 11%, will be for domestic and commercial properties by the boiler upgrade scheme. Now, between 2022 and 2025, you can have £5,000 grants offered for installation of air source and £6,000 for heat pumps. And the government hopes that this is going to bring down the costs of installation after the subsidy period and therefore encourage more installations. But, I'm really sorry, folks, hope is not a strategy. And of course, we can't forget embedded carbon. Without widespread existing building decarbonisation across the globe, all the buildings that we have, 2/3 of global building that exists now will be in 2014. It will still be emitting CO2 emissions, and we won't achieve the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degree target. Achieving zero emissions from existing building stock will mean identifying suitable building intervention points like point of sale, major renovations, and integrating building energy upgrades at these convenient times. And of course, let's talk about new builds. The global building floor area is expected to double by 2060. This is to accommodate this largest wave of urban growth in human history. It's been suggested that around 2.4 trillion square foot of new floor area will be added to the global building stock. That's the equivalent of adding an entire New York City to the world every month for 40 years. Now, unlike operational carbon emissions, which can be reduced over time with building energy upgrades and the use of renewable energy, embodied carbon emissions are locked in place as soon as the building is built. It is critical that we get a handle on embodied carbon now if we are to achieve zero emissions by 2014. So achieving zero embodied emissions, we're going to require adopting the principles, reuse, including renovating existing buildings, using recycled materials, designing for deconstruction, reduce, including material optimization and specification of low to zero carbon materials, and sequester, including the design of carbon sequestering sites and the use of carbon sequestering materials. I mean, just 3 materials, concrete, steel, and aluminium, are responsible for 23% of total global emissions, and most of this is used in the built environment. So this is an incredible opportunity for embodied carbon reduction in these high impact materials through policy design, material selection, and specification. But worryingly, there are many in the industry are just not being forward thinking enough. They're focused on what they need to cover off regulatory requirements. It's like it's a tick box exercise. What they really do need to think is how they are going to get to net zero. So I think that's my my 20 minutes. So I will stop sharing, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jen. There's a lot of, in a good way, provocations and prompts there. There's one that I'd like to start with, which is about this green premium, which in some respects you're saying correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation, that there are many other factors involved. But how does it work in practice that on the face of it, if there is a potential 10% net gain, that should be enlightened self-interest for landlords, and yet, seemingly on the whole, it's tenants who are willing to pay more for such improvements, or companies, rather than landlords. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually, because we within the survey that we did, and it's a chart that I didn't actually, I chose not to show. We've looked at whether tenants and landlords, whether they will pay more for different features, and it really did show that there was a divergence. In some of the features that landlords thought tenants would pay for, tenants didn't want to pay for, and vice versa. So we really need to have this collaboration from with landlords and occupiers, and a lot more sort of I suppose communication, really, so that we make sure that the money is being spent in the right areas, so that landlords don't effectively lose out.
There's an inherent misalignment, or at least currently. I'm putting words in your mouth, but essentially that's your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. I want to come on to a very current issue, which all sorts of businesses, our own, all others, are sort of grappling with, which is about, it applies to tenants and landlords, which is about occupancy of offices post-pandemic, given the prevalence of working from home. The FT reported last week that return has essentially stalled, and it may be as low as 25%. This is much more City of London, but where London goes, perhaps others follow. It's certainly patchy, definitely well below pre-pandemic levels. How do you think that interplays with the drive towards sustainability? Empty offices are not particularly eco-friendly, given all the heating and light that's still needed.
Well, no, they're not. But then, is there a match against commuting and people coming into the coming in and out? So there are other influences as well. I was very interested in the statistics because someone else mentioned the FT report to me, and I did wonder whether the data was taken over Easter. Because I don't know if anyone has been on a train or been into city centres over the last week. It's back to normal. I mean, we've got 68% occupancy in our headquarters in London, which is pretty much what we would have before. But I do think there is an opportunity for occupiers to review how they're using their offices, whether they need enough space, whether they need more, whether they need less, and how they're using it. I mean, certainly we know we have a big workplace strategy team within CBRE, and we know they've done a lot of work with clients. And one of the really interesting interplays is that with people working at home more, offices are being used in a different way. So, for example, there's more collaboration space. People are working. Gone are the days where you have the kind of battery hen, laptops and computers, and actually, there's much more sort of collaboration space, and it becomes much more of a kind of a destination. So, yes, there may be fewer people on any one day within the office, but actually, we need to look at it in the broader sense. It's not just a place that people go to do business, although obviously that is the primary reason, but people go there for social reasons. More younger members of the team go because they want to learn. So there's lots of different uses of the office. So I think we need to be very mindful of the energy usage. A lot of technologies are going into, you mentioned the lights. Certainly, there are very straightforward technologies that lights are only used when you go in and out of offices. So if you've got a floor that's not used, then the lights wouldn't go on. So I think it's about making sure that we adopt the technologies that we can to make sure that any building is as efficient as it possibly can.
I'm sure you're right to caveat it with whether or not the data was too skewed towards Easter. Still, the underlying does appear to be quite profoundly different to what it was hitherto. And all of us are figuring it out about the best way. Yeah. And to your point about how offices are used, this is something that one of our sponsors today, Interaction, have been very strong about, that offices need to be places where people want to go as well as perhaps hitherto have had to go. Let's come on, and I know this is very top level given the sheer amount of sort of data and analysis that you've got, but you've talked about the green premium and the brown discount. Net, do you think that premium will outstrip the brown discount?
I think what we will find is that there won't be, ultimately there won't be a green premium, because that will be the norm, and so it will even out, and it will actually be the brown discount. It'll be a discount. So that I think is the way that it will work out. If you think of any market, if you've got a new entrant that comes in and they can, they've got a particular monopoly, should we say, just for argument's sake, and they can come in and charge a much higher for a higher product. But actually, when everyone else develops the technologies, the prices kind of level back down again.
Let's come to this biodiversity point. You mentioned this stipulation is, quote, likely to come into effect by winter 2023, which is really not far away at all. So, well, first of all, will it happen? But really, what advice are you giving clients, and what practical steps are they taking? Is it typically offsets?
Yeah, I mean, there is at the moment, people are working it through. As I say, we've got this metric, the 3.0 and things, and I think it's still very much like work in progress, and how is it actually going to work in practice. So I think, I do believe it'll come in. I think it is really important, and I think it has to come in, but it hasn't yet. And I think there's a little bit of anxiousness and nervousness about how actually the mechanism will work.
And your point, and there's such rich data and thinking behind your research, and one specific point that only 96,000 EPC B or better ratings have been issued in the last 11 years, when at least 1 million or more are needed by 2030. That's really salutary. So what change, political or otherwise, is needed, or frankly, is this all pie in the sky now?
We just need to, developers and investors just need to make sure that they're getting those EPCs. And I mean, I would have thought, given that the regulations are going to come in, you would have thought that any new building will be B or higher, because why would you not be? So that would be point one. But it's about, upgrading the energies as they can. Now, we do think that there might be a shift up of EPC levels because of new energy and more efficient energy that's just coming through. So there could well be a bit more of a shift up. So I wouldn't say all is lost, but I would say that investors do need to start having this in their rear view mirror, because otherwise they will find that they've got stranded assets.
Yeah, and that's a point that Simon made from JLL's perspective as well. It's action now, and it actually is in commercial interest as well as ethical or environmental issues and motivations. Talk us through some of those, and you've touched on these, some of those key steps that companies are taking to reduce their carbon footprint in their real estate.
I mean, there's a lot of a lot of lens around building materials that are being used. You know, and can we use, you know, the more carbon-friendly cement and things. There's a lot of you know, focus on that for a start. A lot of focus, very interestingly, on the on the social side of how developers and investors can improve an area, or how they, you know, can they be employing people that are from a locality and things like that. So I think that's a really interesting. It's not specifically about the building, but it is part of a kind of a wider diversity and inclusion and obviously social point. Again, I touched on it with technologies. Technologies is hugely important. You know, making sure that there is the right technology in there. And the point you made earlier about making sure you having the right space, you know, and we are finding some companies are having a strategy where they will dictate when people are in the office. So I mean, it sounds a bit mean. I didn't mean it in that way, but, you know, sort of say, right, okay, you know, you are in 3 days a week, so your days are Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and someone else is Thursday and Friday, etc., so that you can smooth out the pattern of employees in, so you don't have any kind of peak days. You know, I mean, if anyone's been on a train, you know, in train recently, you know that Wednesday is always really busy. Well, if you've got everyone coming in on Wednesday, no one coming in on a Monday and Friday, you're going to need just as much office space as you did before. Whereas if you can smooth it out and level it out, then actually you might be able to reduce the amount of office space for the same number of employees as you would have done before. But again, improving technologies, making energy updates when you can, and taking into account the wider environment.
Yeah.
Local, you know,
I mean, all companies are grappling with that. Do you have anchor and core days, because those are the days when you want the critical mass of people in, or do you spread out and get the notional efficiency? Come on to a slightly macro point about sustainability. Do you think that there are signs that sustainability or commitment to it is becoming a key part of companies' reputations, that investing in ecologically appropriate surroundings is commercially beneficial?
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, we asked a question about would you the kind of desire or not desire of your partners, and so is that important? And we are finding, you know, that people are, you know, very much when people are going to pitches or things like that, there is a much more of a focus on so who's in the, so from a very basic level, who's in the pitch. So have you got a more diverse workforce, for example? But then at the other end of the scale, well, do you want to be working with a military, you know, or an arms producer, or are there countries you don't want to work with, and things like this? So you know, we are finding that this kind of overall consciousness has really increased, and we know that there's a lot more investment. The investment funds have got a lot of capital where, you know, for ethical investments and green investments. So I do think there's definitely been you know, a sea change over the last year or so.
And do you think that it's a question we just had just in from the Bristol Life team? Do you think that that more needs to be done to make people, particularly companies, aware of those targets, but actually the actions that can be taken? There's a gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we found, you know, much of the mechanisms and interventions that are being put in place are because of the regulatory backdrop. They're not because they're doing it to be green. They, you know, they might say they're doing it to be green, but they're doing it because for the regulatory backdrop. You know, and it's back to the, you know, the very initial point. You know, the companies are not here to be altruistic, you know, and the much we sit there and say, oh, you know, we agree with Greta, and, you know, we don't want to kill our planet for our children, etc. Companies are there to make money, and it's only when they see the financial benefit or loss of not doing something or doing something or not doing something that they are going to act. And so whether they, you know, can be pushed into it by regulation or pushed into it for financial reasons, that's when we'll really see the change.
And may I say, from our point of view as a media company, we are very aware of our responsibilities here. So we're very keen to help spread that word and to encourage companies to be aware, at least, of governmental strictures that are coming down the line. One last question for you, Jen. I know you're going to join our expert panel subsequently. A quick thought here: are you seeing any marked regional variance on sustainability where London leads, others follow? To
be honest, no.
Really?
We and again with the survey we did look at geographies, and there didn't seem to be any discernible pattern, which is great.
Yeah, good. Well, on that, not quite bombshell, but on that point, Jen, we're going to stop at this moment. Thank you for your analysis and provocations, and we'll see you on the expert panel 12:15, 12:20, something of that order. So thank you very much indeed on behalf of everyone.
My pleasure.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Very
See you
good.
later.
Thanks.
Bye.
And just a reminder, this point about communicating, some of the stuff that's coming down the line, we will be featuring this analysis from Jen, from Lucian, and comments this morning in a special sustainability report published next month in our magazines Bath Life, Bristol Life, Cardiff Life, and Exeter Living, as well as a special extended online version. Talking of companies involved in this session this morning, please have a look at these who've joined us today from those cities and areas, from Bristol, from Cardiff, Exeter and Bath. You'll see some of the companies attending in just a moment. It's just a stellar array of all different scales and sizes of business. We'll have a couple of iterations of that subsequently as well. Do look out for them at the networking from 12:45 or so, and hook up using the chat function right now. Let's have a look, our last look at what's to come. This is the remaining elements of today's session. We've got the Visionaries panel coming up shortly, this new built environment, then that expert panel, and then the networking. Right, talking of visionaries, lovely word, isn't it? These clever luminaries creating and shaping the built environment, specifically in the context of sustainability. It is, again, a properly stellar cast. So good morning this morning to Mike Bourne of Interaction, sponsor of this panel session. Interaction is a strategic workplace design and build consultancy, very much focused on why people and how people use offices. Nick Hodges, Associate Passive House Director for FCB, Field Clegg Bradley Studios, REBA award-winning architectural practice, projects through the region with Brabazon in Bristol for YTL, throughout the UK, Cyprus, Bangladesh, Tokyo, and much more. And Pepper Barney from Bibo Studios, 2018 founded Trowbridge-based practice, offering, quote, lovely quote, a more joyful approach to designing and delivering architecture. So Mike, perhaps talk us through an example of sustainability in practice for Interaction for recent client work or some such. I mean, if you can name the client, so much the better, but the type of client you've been working with, what you've been doing. And Mike, you are on mute, I'm afraid, sir. Perhaps you're not.
Can you hear me now?
Well, I'm sorry, whether it's our end, your end, or the ether, we couldn't hear you briefly. We can now, so thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, so it's a really exciting time. We've got kind of a raft of clients who are really kind of keen on this subject at the moment, so it's a great time for us. I suppose one in particular being the Halo building in Bristol, working with Osborne Clarke. They're really forward thinking. So it's been a great opportunity for us to flex our kind of creative muscles and our innovative thinking, which has been, it's a fantastic opportunity.
And flexing those muscles and creative thinking, perhaps give a specific example, if you may. This, I think I've heard it said, this is the most sustainable or green building in the region, this Osborne Clarke new venture.
Yeah, I believe you're correct. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the fit out aspects, it gives us so much opportunity to look at the types of products available, materials being used, and how the space is used, and how people interact with that space. So there's so many good kind of pillars to build on there.
Yeah, good. Let's bring in Nick and Pepper on this one. It's an open question to you, really. What does sustainability mean to you and your client work? Perhaps some examples of that, please, from either of you.
I'll kick off, I suppose.
Please do. Kick away.
I think we tend to kind of base our definition of sustainability around the UN SDGs, and so it's much more kind of broad thinking to do with the technology as well as the kind of anthropological side of things, which is where our particular interest has been recently with our clients, and that's much to do with kind of engagement and talking to people, sort of real people that don't come to conferences like this, for example. So that's really kind of where our starting point on the definition of sustainability.
Real people, I'm sure most of us are flesh and blood in some way, but I get the point entirely. How about you, Nick? Perhaps some examples of sustainability in action with your clients.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is an increasing sort of diversity of what sustainability means. So if you went back 5 years ago it was BREEAM. We're now seeing a much more sort of plural view of what sustainability might be, and I think obviously carbon being the big now new driver word, but I also think longevity and understanding that we have a responsibility in the long term, and we are seeing projects that are coming through with a real interest in designing for longer, 100-year design life or beyond, and understanding the responsibility that the clients have and our projects have to future generations.
To this point, we've had from a couple of perspectives earlier that sometimes, forgive the analogy, the troops are ahead of the general, that sometimes clients are leading more strongly than landlords, perhaps, by earlier example. Do you as practices see yourselves as followers of clients, or are you the leaders, you're pushing them on to other areas they may not have otherwise considered in the sustainability area? Mike, perhaps start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to think we're helping a lot of our clients on my journey. We're providing them a lot of expertise and knowledge. We want to be doing the best we possibly can on every project we work on, and so very much trying to lead every client on that sustainable journey.
Yeah. Pepper, for you, in terms of you have a very clear focus on what you're seeking to achieve. Do you lead or follow clients?
I think it sort of depends on the nature of the project, inevitably. But what we've found is that we're getting increasingly more involved with business cases for our clients and trying to kind of make the commercial case for sustainable measures within the project, not just whether you can afford to make kind of fabric investments, but also what the whole kind of end user experience is going to be. And sorry, that's sort of vague, but it covers quite a lot of sectors. So in that sense, it's really more partnership. We're neither kind of leading or following. We're working with people who have business objectives of their own, and we're helping them accomplish that through a range of measures that include, like I say, supporting the business case, but then also the building that delivers that for them.
And of course, somewhere between the regulatory requirements, the client desire, the budgets, the physical space or whatever, and indeed the role of advisors, consultants such as yourselves, between all of that there is a meld, and it is of course leading and following in part. But I wondered about this point, how you seek, and I assume you do, how you seek to persuade your clients to go beyond the mandated of what's required. Perhaps Nick, I mean, you're involved in for FCB such incredibly complex pieces of work. It must be extraordinary trying to sort of juggle those various requirements, but also to persuade clients to go further.
Yes, and I think it does depend on, I suppose, finding the clients with those common ambitions and aspirations. And I think we do see it on those key projects. It's about taking clients on a journey with you and showing them where they are and where they could be, and it's working with those clients to find those opportunities to sort of further things that are already on their or potentially on their agenda, and we use things like One Planet Living internally, and sometimes we take that to them and say, well, here is a broader definition of sustainability or a broader definition of where your projects might be that look at things beyond just fabric or carbon or use. It gets into health and well-being. It gets into issues around biodiversity, and really try and find out, tap into what those client ambitions might be.
But by the nature of for each of you, your time horizons, perhaps more, especially yours, Nick, in terms of the scale of projects, you're each futurologists and trying to imagine what the future might look like. We'll come on to that because I'm really interested in that area, but I want to come to something more, perhaps more immediate, which is about legislation. When you consider recent legislation and the direction of travel, what might you expect next? And yeah, let's do a bit of the futurizing. What might the you of 2032 be faced with? Who'd like to go first?
We're all being too polite, so
you're all being too polite. Come on then, you jump in. Have a go.
Well, we already know some of the things that we think will land. I mean, for example, within the practice, members of the practice have been working on Part Z, which is looking at establishing embodied carbon as part of the regulatory framework. And I think we hope that that's some of the regulatory change. I think what we're hoping is that there's that, you talked about the difference between regulation and what people are doing and whether we're leading or following. And I think we're hoping that there's a sort of the backstop of regulation, but as a consequence, we see people starting to step forward and really, not going beyond carbon, going into, well-being and quality of the environment for users, and making sure that we're taking a long-term view of, future climate models, so overheating and ventilation needs, those sorts of areas.
Thanks. And for Pepper or for Mike, any sense of that regulatory direction of travel? We've heard comments from both Lucy and Jeanette about how government, of course, is seeking to drive change. What might you expect the points of emphasis to be in the coming years, regulatory-wise?
From our experience of this is much to do with the kind of retrofit movement and the impact of regulation at scale on sort of decarbonizing the existing building stock. And I think what's been interesting for us is that when you start to get into the minutiae of the existing building stock and realizing that you're addressing individual, households and their budgets, and it's much sort of more exciting to have a new kitchen than it is to put on external wall insulation, and we're having to kind of handle that sort of you said that the sort of scale of these things. Actually, all of us are thinking country scale, global scale, but also at domestic scale, all in the same breath when it comes to the decarbonization agenda and how that's gradually coming through in regulation.
Mike, any thoughts on regulation, or is that simply, that's out there, it'll happen, you'll cope, you'll respond, you'll help clients?
We'll help them. I think I'd kind of expand on some of those comments and some of the comments of some of your earlier speakers. One of them used a great term, carrot and stick, and I definitely think the stick needs to be continuously coming in at a higher level, just to constantly drive improvement. But yeah, we'll help clients whatever happens.
Do you, having some from the outside, some sense of your businesses, knowing some of your practices, do you actually find this time is your time has come, that sustainability is liberating, that it enables fresher, better, cooler, more challenging and interesting thinking for you as practices as well as clients? It's a good time for you?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Like I alluded to earlier, it really kind of drives that innovative thinking, creativity. It allows us to explore other options which you wouldn't necessarily have the scope to explore. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, trying to remember back a few years, maybe in a couple of decades, what office fit out was and office thinking was it's pretty bog standard. Whereas the offer that Interaction has and others, but the offer you have is profoundly innovative. Same for you, Nick. Your time has come. Is that how you and the team at the practice see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are a research-driven practice, research and design at the heart of what we do, and seeking those opportunities to harness the potential of our projects and the reality of those projects to see them as a method of furthering some of that research. And as I said, it's about finding those clients who want to be a part of that as a process. I think is really important to us, and we're really excited by those new opportunities around sustainable design and sustainable delivery. It's great to have the ideas, but it's actually even more valuable to see it happen and deliver it.
Yeah. Come on to this futurologizing, slightly ugly word, but there you go, point. We can try and sort of posit what might be happening, what's already happening post-pandemic. There's less urban driving, more working from home, the degree to which, don't know. Perhaps better quality of life, at least more focus on that, fewer, if possibly longer commutes. That post-pandemic world continues perhaps to accelerate pre-existing trends. But where does your insight come from? How do you seek to interpret what's happening such that you can then work with clients to deliver a future which has a 10, 20, 30, 50-year time horizon? Tough one, eh? Research and data, of course, but so much of this is interpretative, intuitive. Where do you get your inspiration?
I'll lead on that one, I think, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Simply because, so our practice obviously came out of personal experience of working in the built environment in a different way. And we set up as a sort of agile business before the pandemic. And so when the pandemic struck, we were sort of, it was just another day in the office for what we'd already set up as a business. And that really was a bit of insight into that kind of, there are people out there who know what we all wish we knew in 10 years' time. There are people out there who know that already. And I think there's a breakdown in communication. We need to be listening. We need to be seeking out those voices now in order to understand what it is that they already know for 10 years hence. And I think when you start asking questions like that, you get a very different audience. You do start talking more to kind of teenagers and minority groups, and the whole EDI side of things really comes into its own, in parallel with sustainability and that kind of futurology, which I think that's a great term, actually. Yeah,
and for Nick, I mean, you mentioned research, and I'll perhaps step away from that part of it. Where else do you get your inspiration? Such that you can communicate with confidence about, the future horizons for businesses, clients, and so on?
Well, I think it's about understanding I suppose it's a bit where they are and where they want to get to. And we have seen, recently working with higher education clients who I think are, they're responding to things, and it's opening up new avenues for us to think, well, if they're prepared to not discard some of the past, but they're saying we don't want those buildings anymore. The students, we don't think will want those anymore. They're looking in different directions, and that means that I think we feel freed up. But I think as a profession, architecture generally tries to challenge the preconceptions or the norms and say, well, actually, what is it that you really want to have? And it takes us back to the root of who we are as design professionals. What's the root of what we're after? And ask those questions early and ask them frequently. Process for us anyway on the project's quite long. Keep asking those questions because they might well change over design development period, and be, as I said, be agile and flexible about how they might be.
You mentioned, thank you for that. You mentioned in passing about higher education, some of the work you've done there. In a very timely way, our good old friend Anonymous has posited this question, which I think is a really interesting one. What part do our universities have to play in shaping this green future vision through learning and research? And just to say, from our own company's point of view, with activities in Bristol, Bath, Cardiff and Exeter, I think that's 7 universities across the 4 cities. Talk about the uni's role in this.
I think we know that most of the higher education clients quite often set very ambitious targets for themselves. And my experience of working with them is that they're also, very progressive in how they think about how they work, where they're going to work. And even prior to the pandemic, the idea that you worked in a fixed location for them was already becoming anathema. And so we find the opportunities to develop new spaces, new ways of thinking that are responding to what their students are talking about and perhaps some of their research is talking about. They're very present and they're very powerful drivers for us.
Yeah. Any further thoughts from the other two about the university's role? Go on, dive in, Pepper. You're about to go. Go.
No, it's a supply chain thing, and actually we work really closely, with students, not a university as a client, but actually the products of university and architecture students in the built environment, and that kind of new generation of thinkers. Without kind of having all of this matched up with what people are talking about in an academic setting and having the ability to kind of research and test and innovate in that environment, it's sort of end of the line out in real practice, and there seems to be this kind of breakdown unless you get a really good research led practice like Nick's. There's a sort of broadening there that needs to happen, that kind of bringing of research from an academic environment into real life practice, and I think things will move a lot faster if we start to develop a culture of that in the built environment. Apologies, Mike, I interrupted you.
In a sense, you're sitting at that nexus between theory and practice, because much of your work is theoretical. It's about a future which doesn't as yet exist. Mike, your thoughts here?
Yeah, I was going to add it's powered by the individual. If you can empower the students and feed their expectations into the universities, that's how you'll get the outcome.
It's an interesting contrarian point in some ways from Jane Ingham. You may spot the similarity of surname from Media Clash. She asks this point, on projects, do any companies feel the sustainability issue and thereby its costs just isn't for them? And so they haven't taken the opportunity. How do you persuade those naysayers beyond you've got to do it for legislation reasons? You're all being very, very quiet. I'm sure you've had these conversations with clients. So come on, Nick, you perhaps kick on this one.
Yeah, we've used different routes with different clients. So I think it depends quite often on what their aspirations are. And as I said earlier, we're trying to tune in with those. Yeah, cost is an absolute for most clients. You know, there isn't an unlimited pot, and sometimes it's about showing. And actually, with all of them, really, it's about showing value. It's about the values, their values, but also the value of what they get. And if we can demonstrate that what we're providing has value, and not just in necessarily costs and pounds terms, and it's also perhaps a little bit about being intelligent about where we spend the money. Making things work hard. You know, we've demonstrated that existing buildings can be hugely valuable as a commodity and an object, but also that then the conversion cost is going to be, you know, much more efficient, much more effective, and so yeah, I think for me it's about value, you know, and all different threads of it.
One or another, and by value, you're sort of expressing, but it's not solely monetary. There are other aspects of value, perhaps like social value or health and well-being value, or in businesses' cases, reputational value and recruitment and multiple other areas. Any thoughts about this when you've had each of you other two have had to deal with clients about and say, you know what, no, I want to do what gets me the maximum commercial value, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many parameters on a project that ultimately you can identify the values and the ambition of your client you're working with. You do then have to maximise the impact aligned to those goals. There's so many different opportunities for us to explore intelligent design options around how we can introduce innovative concepts aligned to those goals.
It's a couple of commercial points here. I mean, are there some clients, because of their lack or lesser interest in sustainability, that you'd simply choose not to work with? Have you ever been in that position, or has it not ever got that far? Nick, again, I see you smiling, so I suspect there's a backstory lurking there.
I'm not sure it's a backstory. I think, as a practice, and I think we're not alone in this ambition. I know that many practices are sort of looking at 2030 and saying, well, we want to be doing nothing but net zero carbon projects or similar by 2030. I think that's about stating our position. And I think we would hope that by that point, clients are in that same place as us and want to meet us at that point. But I think what we also recognize is that there are sustainability objectives that we can explore and understand and deliver from all projects. It's not all about one single strand, and so as long as there is something to be gleaned or inquired out of it, then we would be really keen to go on that journey. Whether they ever reach a point where there is an absolute no there, I don't know. There probably is eventually. I think we would be really, you know, if there was absolutely nothing there, I think we'd probably find it hard to do it when there's other projects and other clients out there who will be keen to explore that with us.
Thanks. Pepper, ever had such an on-pass?
I'm afraid I lost connection, so I missed the question. I'm sorry.
Well, I could completely invent a question, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to move on from that, if that's okay, because we are coming towards the end of this. I want to pick up one other commercial aspect about you and your companies. We've had a question from Harriet Dixon at Media Clash. How have these issues of sustainability changed the way you pitch for projects? I would imagine you are foregrounding this because it's so close to such deep expertise with great value for you. But also, what extra skills and expertise do your teams need? And are there gaps in terms of your team's capabilities here? I mean that nicely. I mean, you know, because these issues are progressive and changing. How do you pitch clients?
I'll start on that one because I feel like we've changed completely. I mean, our business is going a way that I never expected, to the point that we're sort of not necessarily pitching anymore. It's more about the kind of research, and we are what we are, and the people that want to be involved in that work with us, and the ones that don't get it or don't understand kind of aren't interested, and it's been quite a scary thing commercially, I'm happy to say, but also really kind of rewarding, and we're fortunate to be in a position to do that. But yeah, the pitch thing is a really interesting one, particularly kind of coming back to that retrofit thing, when you actually realize that you're not necessarily talking to councils anymore, but you're actually talking to millions of people, sort of on TV in the evening. If that's your client, then what does that pitch look like? It's a completely different conversation, and we're really enjoying having it with whoever will listen.
You didn't say this, and you'll probably resile from it as an expression, but it's almost like you're crowd surfing on your reputation. That seems to be an element of strategy. For you, Nick, and the practice, how have these issues changed the way, if not pitch, but how you talk with clients, and indeed, brought your own teams on to be able to articulate them?
Yeah, we've certainly been investing in training and making sure that we're able to deliver on some of the ambitions we know are coming through in the future. So we know there'll be an increased interest in passive house projects. So we've been increasing that training as an example. But it's also allowed us to utilise, as I said earlier, some of those internal systems we use, like One Planet Living. We found then there's more of a place to talk about those externally and more receptiveness to that. And so we've been more confident about talking about the full breadth of things that we do, and not feeling perhaps like we're now some of our work is a bit niche. I think we now know it's more mainstream, and we can share all of that work, and that I think there's an interest and receptiveness to it.
And Mike, perhaps a closing thought here, that these issues, these sustainability issues, continue to change, but how have they changed the way that interaction works?
Yeah, so that pitch process has definitely changed, and it is continuing to evolve. And the emphasis changes from client to client depending on what their own goals and values are. So we are constantly carrying out gap analysis of ourselves to identify where we need to grow and change. We're on this journey like everybody else, and so it's not like you can do some training and be done with it. It's a constant evolution.
Yeah. Constant evolution indeed, constant challenge, constant opportunity as well. On your behalf, I would like to thank our visionaries this morning, to Mike from Interaction, Pepper from Bebo, and also Nick from FCB Studios. Particular nod again to Interaction, one of our sponsors, and a highly thoughtful company about workspace, strategy and sustainability. To you each, thank you. Last group of some of our companies attending, just have a look at these. It gives you an idea of reach and scale and so on. Bristol, Cardiff, Exeter, Bath businesses, and many more, many dozens more are logged on just this morning, so there wasn't time to include here. But do look out for them at our networking from 12:45 or so, or hook up using the chat function. Now, well, look, there's even more, lots of companies. Before we come on to our expert panel, which is the concluding session, final discussion, I want to draw your attention to these, the key dates and times for the Property Awards in Bristol, Bath, Cardiff and Exeter. You'll see the various dates there. Sponsorships are now open, and we've had a number of really interesting and productive discussions with new companies joining the tribe, as it were, which is great, as well as that earlier roster which I showed previously. Nominations open for each of them in June, and we'll also be running special launch events. This is an additional networking event in all 4 cities that are on tour with those 4 cities, plus sponsors and finalists events in September and October, depending on which city. And so please do, if you're looking to connect with property professionals, to partner with, to generate business, to get stimulus such as we've had today, but to be a material part of the property scene in Bristol, Bath, Cardiff and Exeter, please do talk to us about it. Check on social, but also check our magazines as well. We'll continually update, as well as email marketing and so on. Right, let's come on to this expert panel. We're in danger of being nearly on time. That's a bit unexpected. It's another stellar panel. Here we have Bianca Laura Latini. I'd stress, by the way, Bianca, Senior Sustainability Engineer for Bureau Happold, our hosts again this morning, and these are exceptional surroundings, and we're really, really proud and pleased to be there. As mentioned, Southwest-based interdisciplinary practice, 1,900 employees, 31 locations, and some extraordinary work. It is worth delving into their website to get some sense, if you don't know already. Nick James, additionally, from one of our sponsors, Future Ground, design-led, sustainability-focused consultancy. And Pam Barbato, Action Net Zero, also a sponsor, a newish, technical term, newish sustainability delivery partner. Welcome. So let's bring you each forward, and I hope you've been able to see at least some of today's session. I just wondered what have been, you felt have been some of the key themes, and maybe even perhaps surprises, points of emphasis. Let's start with you, Nick, at Future Ground.
So the key reflections for me on this morning, I think, is just sort of think about the scale and pace of change that's needed for an industry that's arguably not very good with change. I think, there's a lot in that, and although there are lots of examples out there around sort of positive things we can be doing, this isn't shopping. We're not shopping for technical fixes here. This is much more of a systemic change that's needed, which is going to present both challenge and opportunity for a lot of individuals and organisations. And just as a little bit of context, Future Ground, what types of clients are you working with? What sort of conversations? We do a lot. So we're sustainable place strategists. So we do a lot with organisations that are involved in sort of making and managing buildings and large scale pieces of built environment. So lots of landlords and developers, housing associations, local authorities, private landlords. So they're generally organisations that are taking quite a long term view on sustainability and value, which is often quite a helpful client base to be working with. Yeah, thanks. Bianca, is from what you know, of course, but also what you've heard this morning, are you overall encouraged? Do you think the rate of change and receptivity is where it needs to be, or is more required?
Oh gosh, I think more is required. We know that business as usual is not enough to meet our targets, and a lot of people still work to business as usual paces. And I think we're quite lucky that sometimes the clients that we do have are the ones that are more willing to keep up with that pace. But if we want to look at it in a more holistic way, there are a lot of people that aren't. And if we actually want to have a global impact, we need to find ways to make it easier and more accessible for the people that aren't necessarily as forthcoming. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but my faith, it's still there. Can I just push you on that point? You used an expression, we need to make it easier. What might that mean in practice? What types of things are the industry as a whole, insofar as it's an homogenous group, or maybe Bureau Happold specifically? What needs to change? I think there are a few things. I mean, legislatively, I think there's city councils like Bristol City Council that are going to come out with their new policies, and they're quite modern. Whereas not all city councils do that, and a lot of clients look at what they need to do for policy. So I think if all policies keep up, then that's a good thing. But I also think quite fundamentally our definition of sustainability is incoherent. Even within major industry groups, net zero carbon would be the same for LETI as it is for UKGBC, as it is for BREEAM. And so I think one of the things that would make things easier is alignment in the industry as to what we need to do and how to achieve it. Because when you're trying to convince a client to do something, and they open Google and they Google how do I do this, and 3 different options come up, and you're trying to sell them on one of them. It takes a while to be like, oh, this one's better than this one. This is why. If there was a coherent message, then I think things would be a lot easier.
Thank you. Talking of coherent messages, we heard some extremely coherent messages earlier from Jen, and I fear I didn't introduce you as part of this expert panel, so apologies on that. But I wondered, aside from your multiple observations earlier, Jen, what you felt or feel have been some of the key themes coming out, and maybe some of the surprises from this morning.
I think I'd echo what Bianca made say. I think there is still not enough has been done. We need to do more. We're still learning, and that really it's become a non-negotiable now rather than a nice to have. And if you think back, a couple of years, it was very much around ESG. Well, companies will start thinking about their kind of corporate strategies around ESG. When there's more money flowing around, etc. They're not going to think about it now because we're in COVID, etc. But actually, I think it's highlighted that it's just something that has to be done. And, there's a huge amount of transition risk for companies and corporates that don't buy into this, because they will find they've got stranded assets, and, they've got to kind of work through when they start in the process. Obviously you don't want to jump in too soon if you're going to get technology or something at a cheaper rate. But on the other hand, if you don't start planning and preparing, you could find yourself with a stranded asset very quickly.
In a sense, it's typical of what I'm sure we've all seen elsewhere, that yesterday's heresy is today's orthodoxy, and it's maybe not quite wholly orthodoxic, is that a word, now, but it's becoming so. We're all waking up to this, all realising, which is one of the reasons why we ran this conference. Let's bring in Pam from Action Net Zero. I'm going to ask probably my dumbest question of the day, given the name of your organisation. What does Action Net Zero do or seek to do? Just tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll come on to your thoughts about this morning.
Thank you, Greg. So Action Net Zero, we're a community interest company, and we were only set up a couple of years ago, but our purpose is actually to be able to help accelerate sustainable change. So that's working across the CCC strategic framework. So we have the principle that top-down policy, bottom-up community, understanding that change will happen in the middle, or we like to think so. So our focus is about supporting residents and also businesses, specifically within a community area. We're working across the Southwest, and that's because the backdrop is 60% of carbon reduction to meet net zero targets has to come from those two audiences. And we strongly believe that awareness, engagement, co-creation through partners and experts is actually, on a community level, is the way to be able to break down some of the barriers that we know exist. So we work with subject matter experts. We ran a big campaign last year in Bristol focused around decarbonising transport ahead of the Clean Energy Zone coming into Bristol, which is actually going to be this year. We're focused very much on energy at the moment. So this is all about freeing and democratising energy. So, how can we ensure that on the backdrop that 90% of the Southwest energy is fossil fuel? Actually, how can we start to nudge those changes? And obviously around property in particular, so those private landlords, we know 8,000 non-residential businesses across the Southwest actually need to be renewable energy focused and make sure that they're resilient. So hopefully that gives you an idea. So our focus is about engaging people, identifying those barriers, then collectively co-creating the solutions that deliver sustainable change on a community level.
And presumably you have, I know you're fairly early stage, but you have some examples of key work or key collaborative plans which are in train in the region. Perhaps you just touch on one of those. Perhaps.
Yeah, of course. So I mentioned about the transport piece. We're all about social impact. So where are the opportunities beyond all of the amazing, clearly big infrastructure projects that are going on with large corporate entities? For us, this is about understanding actually where are the opportunities to co-create solutions where they may have been overlooked. An example is to transition to electric vehicles, which we know is critical in terms of electrification, moving away from fossil fuels, air pollution. One of the biggest barriers is not having enough chargers. And I think anyone that lives in Bristol and particularly in the Bath region will know that. I have an EV and I'm lucky enough to have a charger at home. But actually, if you don't, switching to an electric vehicle, which has lots of cost benefits, as we well know, total cost of ownership, if we think about cost of petrol and diesel at the moment, maintenance costs. So lots of incentives incentives for change, but the critical barrier is not having enough charging. So we collaboratively through our network last year have brought in a model that we're now rolling out on the ground to support, which is about implementing electric to 7 kilowatt EV chargers into places like community venues, sports grounds, also into residential, so businesses, properties where they're not gated, for residents that are local to that premises to use overnight. That enables that community centre to have some incremental revenue. It enables them obviously to build their sustainability reputation, engage with those local audiences about breaking down some of the key myths that we know around specifically with electric vehicles around cost of ownership, etc., etc. So it's about creating and planting these little seeds for change to then ripple and be applied, whilst the bigger rapid charging infrastructure that's being obviously handled by the local council, for instance, is being put into place. So we're all about here and now, what might we be able to do that will reduce those emissions?
Yeah, that EV issue, of course, it's another aspect of sustainability, and we'll come on to some other points shortly. But essentially, without private overnight space, domestic or business, you can't really run an electric vehicle, typically now at least.
Yeah, and that type of model we're working around, so solar PV particularly, also around the opportunities around wind power. We have an influencer program. We're very fortunate to have people like Graham Cooper, head of National Grid Renewables, who is a fantastic voice for us. And again, this is about breaking down some of those myths. And to Helen's point earlier on in the session, talking about that 5-year payback that she mentioned, on solar PVs, tennis court, with the £31,000 install, that starts to become quite a powerful conversation to many businesses that understand the liability issues of not acting now in terms of their premiums, for instance.
That's a business model close to home. You think, yeah, that cost, that return, happy days, one would think. I was going to come to a slightly broader point, which is this. For all our panellists, we've discussed, or our speakers have discussed, a whole variety of sustainability-related areas. But what have we not discussed today in terms of sustainability and property that you would like to, bring up foreground now? Or have we done everything?
I could start.
Yeah, you go. Bianca, you go.
Sure. So we kind of touched upon it a bit. We talked about embodied carbon, but it's like the extent to how important it is orders of magnitude greater than probably what we've been really talking about. We might have approved Part Z on the horizon, which would require new developments to report on their embodied carbon and potentially later on actually have limits on their embodied carbon. We recently carried out a study for Bristol City Council to create the evidence base for their next policy for heating and cooling strategies. And the MEP embodied carbon, so the embodied carbon of all of these technologies that we're putting into our buildings is incredibly high. Like the amount of things that we put in our buildings to make them more efficient is higher than it's ever been. So looking at the embodied carbon side, not just the operational side, and MEP information is quite scarce at the moment, but what we do know is that if we're implementing a heat pump with R410A, it might be 30% of the whole life carbon, as opposed to R32 or much lower refrigerants with lower impacts. So I think that's something we really need to be questioning the industry on and asking for more transparency on. And then I would also say social value. I know you mentioned it briefly, but I've been working with the UK GBC to develop what good practice looks like in that respect, but also working with BREEAM. Social impact is going to be in the next iteration of BREEAM, and BREEAM is quite embedded in a lot of policies. So if someone's trying to achieve BREEAM excellent in the future, they're going to have to really seriously look at social impact. And then, also embodied social value. I think we need to really question the supply chains that make our buildings possible, because I don't think anyone on this panel would argue that it's a sustainable building if the people that made the materials that go in our buildings, were exploited or their water and air was polluted as a result of it. So I think the last thing that I think we, as an industry, we need to talk about is the transparency of our supply chains and what those look like. And a few other things, but I think I'll stop there.
I think it's a really interesting point, Bianca, looking at the difference of because of course the Paris targets do look at your domestic consumption, not your imported consumption. But we could find that while our domestic target has got has really improved, or our CO2 emissions have really improved, actually we are substituting with imported CO2 emissions that overall actually are worse than we're saving in the UK. So I think it's a really interesting point, and one that really does deserve a little bit more of thought behind it.
Point noted, and the built part of the built environment, as well as the other points raised, we in some way will return to in subsequent property symposia. But I wanted to come back to Nick at Future Ground on this point. When you consider the landscape, for want of a better metaphor, that we've traversed in these few hours, where have we not put sufficient emphasis? What else should we be considering in terms of sustainability and profit in property?
I think in many ways the conversation is it's reflected where the industry is at the moment. Sustainability. I've been working in sustainable property for 20 odd years, and it's changed a lot, sort of more in the last 2 than probably the prior 18, and it's gone very much from kind of a role of sort of convince us this is important to actually help us solve it. And I think that's very much where the conversation is at the moment. I think there's also something around sort of moving from sort of do less bad to do more good, to actually a more regenerative approach to sustainability. And I think that the healing potential for more sustainable built environments, enabling more sustainable lifestyles, I think is really where we need to get to collectively. There's some really interesting work going on in these areas around the sort of interrelationships between biodiversity and health and air quality and carbon. But I think that sort of bigger picture thing is where we need to be as an industry, understand our part within it and how we're an enabler within it. And if we get it right, then we will be able to lead, better lifestyles than we've ever lived before.
And it, in some respects, it must be, dare I say, quite a sort of challenging position for you individual, you as a practice, to be in the forefront of new thinking and persuading all different forms of colleagues of different areas to come with. Is that how you see it? You see, no, I don't mean that in an heroic sense, but if we're in the vanguard of change, it takes time and effort to persuade others.
It does, and I think it's. I kind of mentioned earlier around it not being a kind of a technical fix. This is about a kind of a sense of purpose and a working culture and your ways of working as if you're an organisation trying to do the right thing in the built environment. So, to be honest, as a practice, we spend as much time helping organisations kind of design their culture and their ways of working as much as looking at their built environment, solutions. And I think that's kind of where we need to be collectively focusing now.
I think that latter point is something which has come through. It's been implicit. I was going to say embedded, but that's something else entirely. But implicit in companies' offerings. But it's quite clear that holistic, integrated sense of understanding cultures, business projects, business values, business models, and then being able to iterate it and support iterating it has been true of a number of our contributors today. And if anything, that trend, it is a more complex way of working, but that trend, I suspect, will continue.
I think it's actually, in some ways, I think it's an easier way of working, because you don't end up with the sort of the business as usual bit and then the green bit that sits next to it or in parallel. Actually, if it's just the way you work and what you think is important, then I think it actually simplifies things in many ways.
Right. A broader point for any of you to respond to. It's a very resonant phrase from Jen earlier that hope is not a strategy. Indeed, it isn't. It never was. But more particularly in this context, we've touched on a lot of the more that needs to be done. But do you believe that companies and maybe even government organisations and so on are still in that phase of it's positing a future? It is hope being a strategy, which it can never be. Do you sort of buy that point? There's not enough practical work happening now, or not?
I'm happy to answer that one from a local perspective, working very closely alongside West of England Combined Authority, Bristol Council, and obviously being on the ground in terms of trying to engage sustainable switches. I think the opportunity is absolutely there, as we've said. This is actually the decade of doing. I think that everybody knows actually this year is transformative in terms of putting that strategy and those plans in place, whether that's on a national or local level. I don't think it matters, or an individual level. Is actually about we have to act now, and we need to be able to think about that journey to future-proof, and that's whether you are an individual and you need to future-proof, that you're going to get your mortgage next year or whenever it may be at a decent price, that your insurance premiums aren't going to go up too much, or whether you're a large corporate and you need to meet your science-based targets initiatives and therefore need to make sure that your supply chain comes along with you, right down to, as we've all heard, the stranded asset piece around a physical building as well. And I think it's a future-proof issue. So actually, going back to your point, there's a lot of action that's happening, but it's hugely complex, isn't it? And I think this is where those that in the powers that be know that complexity needs to be connected, and I think we're beginning to get that. We're beginning to see it. But yeah, the challenge ahead of us is enormous, and I think the next decade will have amazing opportunities on an innovative and on a collaborative and partnership level.
Not for the first time. I'm feeling the positivity very much. As we come towards the close of this, we've got a few moments left. Try this a thought. At the risk of untoward regional exceptionalism, are there grounds for believing that this area is ahead of others in terms of sustainability, perhaps almost as an exemplar? We've got the potentially better quality of life, great universities, relative affluence, I suppose, burgeoning reputation, they all help. Do you buy that point, that this area is a bit ahead of the game? Sounds like you don't.
I'll have a go. I think there's a lot of positive. I mean, I'd hate to kind of say that we're winning over others, but I think there's a lot of really good fundamentals here. We're in a region where we are very kind of connected and aware of nature and kind of the strength of it and the fragility of it, and I think that's helpful day to day in terms of looking at how you work. There's also a very strong kind of grassroots culture of sustainability, whether that is individuals or community groups or kind of startups and technology startups, etc. So I think there's a very strong kind of attitude and ecosystem there that's about progression, and I think that is great. It's a great set of foundations for a region to kind of to thrive and maybe show the others how it's done.
Yeah, there's certainly, to one of your points there, the idealism, which I think does shine out through the region, that desire to sort of create the world as you'd wish it. But for our other panellists, any sense of the West and South Wales being in a reasonably good place? Not necessarily being better than, it's not competitive, it's not that. But do you think that?
Yeah, one point, and then I will step back, is City Leap. I'm sure many of you are aware of it, but the very progressive action of the Bristol Council to actually provide a contract that will see the built infrastructure of the entire city reach net zero through a single contract that was announced as being preferred bidder Amoresco. It's £1 billion contract. That I believe, and I had a meeting with them at the beginning of the week, but I believe is the first in the world, but definitely it's a first in the UK. There's Connected Cities and Catapult who are doing very similar things, but I think that to me is a hugely progressive in terms of knowing that the funding isn't just going to come from government. It's actually about pension funds investing. It's about return on investment, and that to me, I think is probably an exemplar of why the Southwest in particular is obviously where it is in terms of leading.
Great, and one way or another, we all need to tell those stories to help make it. It's a strange word, help make it more normative or more baked into thinking. It's not this outlier that it has been. It's absolutely mainstream thinking. I want to come to sort of a bigger picture point. It's perhaps a slightly strange one for you, but if you consider the solecisms of the recent past that we now easily decry, you could smoke in public enclosed spaces until fairly recently, crazy. What we're doing now in terms of property and sustainability, might we be very surprised at in maybe 10, 20, 30 years' time? Every generation thinks they're towards the better stage, the arc of development, trends towards the best. But you look back now and you think, my God, they did that in 2022? I'm going.
I'll
go.
go with the cars, and I think that the transition to electric vehicles. I mean, notwithstanding the point made earlier about the charging points, but I think our children and certainly our grandchildren will be, I don't understand why anyone was, what do you mean put petrol in the car? It's going to be the same sort of things, as the rotary dialer. That their kids are going to put what don't understand. So I think that for me will be something that will change. I think.
And just to press that point, it's cars in the context of fossil fuels or petrol. It's not cars per se, and what that then does to the built environment.
No. It's electric vehicles. It's transition.
Other panelists, Nick perhaps.
I think I'll riff slightly on that lead in. Actually, I think. The other aspects of changes in automotive, our relationship with mobility, so servitization and electrification, I could see the same kind of approaches running through our built environment in a very positive way. So thinking more of built environment as kind of services and as much more of a circular economy and something that is everything is meanwhile in that sense. I think is actually a very exciting way of viewing something rather than necessarily owning a big pile of resources and then having to kind of transact in that way. If you think about you being the custodian of something, then actually it starts you thinking about services and longevity of resources and energy and connectedness in a way that I think is quite exciting. And I hope we'll be thinking more like that and looking back at 2022 and laughing.
Well, who knows? Bianca, from your perspective, as mentioned in the Visionaries panel, this is futurologizing, and Bureau Happold, as an extraordinary international business, must be thinking this way all the time. So what do you think of what we're doing now that we'll look back on and think, oh gosh, did we really?
So one of the things that's becoming clear recently is, it was addressed earlier in one of the presentations, is the performance gap between like EPC and actual how a building actually performs in reality. I like to think that we're going to shift the way we look at the project life cycle and stopping at practical completion, like actually have some accountability past completion beyond a year to make sure that the buildings that we're building actually perform the way that we intended them to, because if they don't, then it was all for nothing. If a piece of paper says that it does, but in reality it's not doing what it's meant to, then it was futile. And so I like to think that mentality will change. I really hope so. I also like to think that, back to what you just mentioned in terms of policy, I think London's been doing some really great things. And a lot of other councils have been incorporating those things on the back of that. And things like circular economy statements before planning, like needing to justify why you're demolishing. Maybe demolishing is going to become taboo. If there's a beautiful building and maybe it's not quite listed status, but you could have done something really wonderful with it, somebody's going to look at that and be like, why did they demolish that? That's like smoking indoors. That's such a waste. And yeah, I think looking at the circular economy and the way that we also, conduct our services past completion, soft landings approach, if you want to look at it that way, I think.
To your point about demolishing the uncomfortable present in a way which undermines the subsequent future, there's a very great and powerful and very sad book called The Sack of Bath, which I'm sure many will know, but to analyse what happened in Bath post-war, how the culture of the city was changed as a result. It's the extraordinary sense of responsibility that anyone in any form of governance has. Let's come to a last point from Pam, then one last question for you each. Pam, your thoughts on anything currently which we'll look back and resolve from subsequently?
I think mine's around the use of energy, or I'd like to think it is. So I think the one thing that we have, all of us, is quite an exciting opportunity to take some quite big choices about not just consumption, because we know reduction is critical, but actually taking some ownership over it. So there's some amazing projects, and I'm going to cite one if that's right. Lawrence Weston, Ambition Lawrence Weston, which I'm sure some of you will be aware of. It's an amazing community project which has been worked on with the council, with Sustainable Energy, CSE, and it is going to deliver 7,000 houses, sustainable energy, procured through a wind turbine that they've actually collectively been able to deliver through community action. And I think for me, it's about actually, we might look back and say, do you know, I never thought that we would all think about energy in a slightly different way, the way that we use it, but the way that we buy it as well. You know, we won't be held to account. There won't necessarily be monopolies where we have no choice. There will be lots of different choices that we can take advantage of. We're not there yet, but I think there's a hope element for me. I think that's a really exciting one. Democratising energy, to quote Graham Cooper.
Democratising energy, indeed. I'm going to ask you each for one last, and if I may ask it to be quite a brief point. If there's one piece of advice about sustainability in property which you would give to those watching, what is it? Perhaps you first, Jen.
Believe it, and we need to do something about it.
I'm sorry, could you say again?
You said believe it.
Believe it.
Believe it, and we need to do something about it.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, Nick.
We're an industry that loves a plan and a strategy, but I think we often find we take comfort from having all the detail there and how it's going to be, you know, all the run up to 2050. So I think my advice would be set the point on the horizon and crack on, but be very open in what you measure, share and learn and adapt to along the way.
Okay, Bianca, our host today at Bureau Happold, your last piece of advice, perhaps?
Gosh, Nick kind of stole the words out of my mouth. I think
it's
resiliency is so important. What good practice looks like is changing constantly. Like the amount of information at the pace at which we're going is so fast. And I think, you know, being open to that change and building resiliency in our models so that we can adopt that change quickly, I think is really important. Yeah.
Well, if you're fourth of four having to offer this and you're thinking, oh God, I hope they don't say the things I was going to say, that task is for you, Pam. Your thoughts, one piece of advice.
Probably similar vein, but I think it's about try to embrace it. Don't be fearful of it. Actually, I think if your mindset is, it's a great opportunity to potentially transform the way you've looked and viewed at sustainability challenges. I think that would be my point. I think there's a lot of fun to have, and it is a journey. But yeah, back to everyone else. Start the journey if you haven't already. You might find yourself in a better place for doing so.
You didn't say this, but I will, which is, you know, it's almost get on with it. I know it's much more subtle and much more elegantly expressed than that. It's quite clear from a variety of comments, presentations today, the desire for change, the understanding of the need for change, and that change is well underway. Query whether it's as fast as it might be, but it's resonant, it's come through powerfully in our speakers. I just want to pick up a quote from Dave Vickerstaff, Senior Associate Architect. I'm just going to check, I'm afraid, Dave, I'm not sure we've got your company name, but we will have shortly, I'm said. I'll just read his thoughts. He said, "Thank you for such a diverse range of speakers and topics with some really interesting insights." Dave is from Bailey Partnership. He said, as an architect, I wholly agree that the next decade could be incredibly exciting and pivotal, perhaps recognised by future generations in the same way as how we viewed how the Industrial Revolution changed the world. And that, from Dave, as a stand-back observation, is incredibly powerful. On your behalf, I would like to thank our expert panellists. If we perhaps have our panellists back on screen. To each, for Jen from CBRE, Nick from Future Grounds, Bianca from our hosts, Bureau Happold, and Pam Barbato from Action Net Zero. Thank you very much indeed. It's been great, and I appreciate your time. And we're going to close pretty shortly now, so thank you. I would also say that, you know, that's it for this Property Symposium. We will definitely run others in autumn and next spring. Please talk to us. We'll pick up the comments that we've had already. We'll consider, you know, what might work. But we can be here as for want of a better expression, somewhere between a connector and an echo chamber. And we are determined to play our part in that process. Thank you to our sponsors, Action Net Zero, we heard from just now, and FutureGround, GA Energy earlier, and Interaction earlier. Thank you to each. Thanks again to our hosts, Björn Happold. Hope we haven't been too noisy or disruptive for you. Thank you for all our panellists and speakers. The roll call is Savills, CBRE, For Partnership, Sero Homes, Principality, Coots, GA Energy, JLL, Barefoot Architects, Interaction, Bebo Studios, FCB Studios, FutureGround, Björn Happold, and Action Net Zero. Please look out for coverage in Bath Life, Bristol Life, Cardiff Life, and Exeter Living, each with a major report promoting clever thinking we've heard today about sustainability in property, and then the extended version online. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it stimulating. Enjoy the remaining networking. Please, just a quick reminder of our Property Awards dates, and we'll see you for those awards, and we'll continue our conversations, of course, this autumn in Bath, Bristol, Cardiff, or Exeter. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the Property Symposium on Sustainability. Be seeing you. Thank you.
Never know how much I love you. Never know how much I care. When you put your arms around me, I get a fever that's so hard to bear. You give me fever when you kiss me, fever when you hold me tight. Fever in the morning, a fever all through the night. Sun lights up the daytime, moon lights up the night. I light up when you call my name, and you know I'm gonna treat you right. You give me fever when you kiss me, fever when you hold me tight. Fever in the morning, a fever all through the night. Everybody's got the fever, that is something you all know. Fever isn't such a new thing, fever started long ago. Romeo loved Juliet, Juliet, she felt the same. When he put his arms around her, he said, Julie, baby, you're my flame, now give us fever. When we kiss it, fever with thy flaming youth. Fever, I'm a fire, fever, yea, I burn forsooth. Captain Smith and Pocahontas had a very mad affair. When her daddy tried to kill him, she said, Daddy, oh, don't you dare give me fever. With his kisses, fever when he holds me tight. Fever, I'm his missus, Daddy, won't you treat him right? Now you've listened to my story, here's the point that I have made. Chicks were born to give you fever, be it Fahrenheit or centigrade, they give you fever. When you kiss them, fever, if you live, you learn. Fever, till you sizzle, what a lovely way to burn. 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 you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? We were caught up and lost in all of our vices. In your pose as the dust settled around us, and the walls kept tumbling down in the city that we love. Great clouds roll over the hills, bringing darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? Oh, where do we begin? The rubble or our sins? Oh, where do we begin? The rubble or our sins? And the walls kept tumbling down in the city that we love. Great clouds roll over the hills, bringing darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all?